Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 26. Hawako Mundo. Xialaporo's lab. Berrigan's heavy footsteps echoed throughout the lab as he entered. He paid no attention to his comrades' fractions as he passed them by, Xialaporo's monstrosities cowering at his presence. How goes the experiment, Xialaporo? He demanded as he approached the scientist. Keeping his back to the number 2 Espada, Xialaporo observed his latest creation. Atop a cylinder machine was a glass orb. Inside was a swirling mass of black and red energy. Tubes ran from the machine into 6 vats on the wall. It should proceed as planned. I must say, you surprised me, Berrigan. Xialaporo gave a coy smile. Offering your own fraction to be used as guinea pigs for my experiment is quite generous. This is their punishment, the cruel man said harshly. He turned his head and looked at the vats. Each of them contained one of his 6 fraction. All of his men had the same expression on their faces as they had energy poured into them via Xialaporo's machine: pain. I consider their pain to be retribution for failing to kill Ichigo Kurosaki. Xialaporo's smile widened by a hair. Well, thanks to their failure, I was able to obtain more than enough of Ichigo Kurosaki's spirit energy from their injuries. He put a hand on the glass orb and stared at the energy inside, Ichigo's energy. Such glorious power. I can see why Lord Aizen prizes him so. The scientist's smile turned maniacal. What I wouldn't give to have the real thing to experiment on, rather than just deal with paltry leftovers. When I'm done, you'll be lucky to have whatever's left of him, Berrigan angrily retorted. He stood in front of Gio's vat and observed. Though the glass was soundproof, the twisted look of pain on the man's face was proof of his screaming. His veins turned black and his body emitted a dark glow as Ichigo's spirit energy was pumped into him. Well, for the moment, I must deal with what I have. I should warn you, Berrigan, that even if the infusion is successful, the side effects could be dire. Infusing a Soul Reaper's energy into an Arrancar is quite dangerous. Even Lord Aizen hasn't dared to make an attempt. At least as far as I'm aware, he quietly added. And since the Soul Reaper in question is a substitute, with the powers of a hollow mixed in as well, even I cannot accurately predict what the outcome will be. As long as one remains to fight for me, I care not if the rest die. His hand balled into a cold fist. Whatever deal Aizen made to the boy means nothing to me. I will see him, that whore and their child dead at my feet. Turning away, he walked for the door. Contact me when it is finished. And Xialaporo. What? Make them suffer more. As you wish, Your Majesty, the pink-haired man said with faux reverence. As the kingly Arrancar exited his lab, Xialaporo grabbed a knob on the machine and turned it. Not even the soundproof glass could hold back the men's screams. Meanwhile, Ichigo blinked as he came to, his hollow metamorphosis crumbling to reveal his normal body. He realized that he was sitting on the ground with Harribel in his lap. Harribel, he spoke confused. Welcome back, Harribel said, smiling when she saw the mask on Ichigo's face crumble away. You kept me waiting. Sorry, Ichigo chuckled. What were we doing? Ichigo asked. Just a little cuddling. Your hollow half is as sweet as you, Harribel said, making Ichigo blush. She got off of Ichigo's lap and stood up, helping Ichigo to his feet. I can sense the change within you. You were successful, I assume. Yeah, I became one with my inner hollow. I see, Harribel nodded. That is good. I can only imagine what new heights you will reach. Now then, show me your new power, commanded Ichigo's teacher. Yes, Ichigo, show us, said a voice behind them. Ichigo turned to see the Soul Reapers, still watching them. The disgusted looks on Soifan and Byakuya's face told Ichigo that whatever happened when he was hollow-feed really pissed them off. What's with them? I didn't do anything too bad, did I? Harribel sighed. Ignore them, Ichigo, she reminded. Those 4 can never understand you and I. The bond we share transcends the boundaries of Hollow and Soul Reaper. It is something that the weak-minded could never understand. Soifan's eye twitched at the obvious jab. You want to repeat that, Arrancar? She reached for Tsuzumaki. I don't care if you are knocked up. One more insult comes out of your mouth and it'll be the last. You two are only alive because we allow it. Don't forget that. An interesting theory, Captain, returned Harribel, glaring back at the woman. Are you upset that I'm loved more than you'll ever be? She taunted. Enough, interrupted Byakuya. Arankar, do not keep testing us. Ichigo, he narrowed his eyes, control her or else. Grabbing Harribel by the shoulder, Ichigo led her farther away from the spying captions before taking a deep breath. Okay, here I go. He closed his eyes and put a hand to her face, reaching inside himself to grasp that power. Harribel was almost knocked back when Ichigo's spiritual pressure erupted, his energy turning black. A whirlwind of power swirled around Ichigo as his body changed. The captains braced themselves as the shockwave hit them. Unohana put herself in front of Azane while Yakiru clung to Kenpachi's shoulder. Soi Fan, however, did nothing as Omeda was blown away. When the dust settled, they could only stare in disturbed shock at what Ichigo had become. Even Harribel was impressed by Ichigo's transformation. She'd assumed that Ichigo would create a hollow mask. But what Ichigo had become was something else. Captain, Renji gasped in alarm. He's a Vasto Lord, Harribel said, smiling beneath her mask. Magnificent. Standing tall, Ichigo looked like something out of a nightmare. Part of his black shihakusho was now white, as if a part of him was splashed with bleach. His mask covered his entire head, horns protruding out the side and giving him a demonic appearance. He looked down at his hand, now clawed and possessing furry tufts of red hair on his wrists. It's different. You are in control now. Your spiritual pressure is impressive. Harribel put a hand on his chest. Strange, you have no hole. She noted. No, I guess not. I think it's because I'm still in control. Ichigo dispelled his new form and took a deep breath. So what do we do now? You have the power. We will train together to help you focus it. And since you are now more than my equal in terms of power, perhaps I may grow as well. She reached for her sword, before she suddenly stopped, her eyes widening in surprise. You. Ichigo caught Harribel before she could fall. Harribel, what's wrong? The woman put a hand on her stomach and she knew that the hour had come. My water broke. Seeing Harribel begin to go into labor, Ichigo quickly picked her up bridal style. Hang on, I'll get you to my dad's clinic and you are going nowhere. Ichigo turned to see the 10 Soul Reapers standing between him and the exit. What do you think you're doing? Ichigo yelled. Get out of my way. Not a chance. Soi Fan had already drew her sword. She gives birth right here where we can see the baby. The head captain's orders were clear. We're to inspect your child to see if it is to be deemed dangerous. Ichigo could not believe that the Soul Reapers would do this now of all times. He glared at the captains barring his way. Of course you'll deem it dangerous, he said scathingly, his anger boiling hot as Harribel continued to cry out in pain. You guys will kill just about anything. Ichigo, Byakuya interrupted, putting a hand threateningly on his zanpakuto. Put her down. Captain Unohana can assist her as a midwife. Please, Ichigo, be reasonable. Unohana stepped forward, the look on her face begging Ichigo to relent. I will do everything I can to help Harribel. But you must relent to our judgment over your child. The look in Ichigo's eyes told them that Ichigo was not willing to relent. Keeping Harribel in his embrace with one arm, Ichigo reached for Zangetsu. Get out of my way. Now, he shouted. Kenpachi grinned as he drew his sword, ready to fight Ichigo again. The other captains prepared to throw down with the boy as well. Unwise decision, boy, Soi Fan said, releasing her shikai. Now you both die. Ichigo raised his sword to unleash a Getsuga Tensho, only to watch in confusion as a barrier erupted between him and the Soul Reapers. Ha! Ha! Repeated the captains as they were boxed in by a barrier of red energy. Captain, Renji struck at the wall to no avail. This is... Oh dear, came a new voice. It would seem that someone tripped a barrier when they released their shikai. I wonder what dashing, handsome rogue set up such a trap. Oh wait, Kazuki flipped his fan open and smirked behind it. That would be me. Kazuki, Ichigo gasped. The shopkeeper cocked a thumb over to the ladder. Go, take her to your dad's. I'll keep them here. Sheathing his zanpakuto, Ichigo took Harribel and rushed to the ladder, Harribel crying out in pain all the while as she continued to feel convulsions. Yoruichi joined Kazuki in front of force field along with Tessai. To say that the captains were pissed was an understatement. Kazuki Urahara, let us out of here now. Soy Fawn demanded, punching the barrier. Not until Harribel has safely given birth to her baby. Then I'll let you out. Kenpachi merely smirked. You must be really dumb if you think this barrier is going to keep me from fighting Ichigo again. Maybe, but you should know, Captain Zaraki. Kazuki's eyes glinted mischievously. I always come prepared. Tessai. Bakudo number 99. Kin. Kenpachi's eye widened when his hands were bound behind him with black cloth, stones keeping them in place. What the hell? He looked back at the trio and could only grin. You really think this can hold me? Perhaps, but let's see how you manage with this. Kazuki pointed behind the captains, making them turn. Shattered shaft. Kenpachi whirled around to see what Kazuki had unleashed, right before a pit opened up underneath him and sent him falling down. Ah! Kazuki chuckled behind his fan. Hehehe, I still got it. Lady Yoruichi, shouted Soy Fawn to her mentor. How can you go along with this? Kazuki and I promised Ichigo we'd have his back, and we intend to keep that promise. She glared at Soy Fawn. We believe in Ichigo. Perhaps you should have more faith. Byakuya tested Tessai's barrier with his hand before turning to the shopkeeper. You will pay dearly for this, Kazuki Urahara. Oh dear, whatever shall I do? Kazuki feigned sadness. Shall I go into hiding, destined to live out the rest of my life as a fugitive, with all my friends turned against me? Oh wait, Kazuki crossed his arms and smirked. I already am. I'm already a fugitive, remember? He sat down on a boulder. You might as well get comfortable. You're going to be there for a while. Ah, shouted Kenpachi, who was still failing. How far down did you make that tunnel? Hana asked, her and Azane peering down into the shattered shaft. Deep enough. Meanwhile, Kurosaki Clinic. Ah. Ichigo cringed as he waited outside the room, forced to do nothing as Harribel gave birth to their child. Harribel, outside the moon continued its nightly sprint, time ticking away into the night. The door to his clinic opened and the Trace Bestia burst in. Where's Master Harribel? Is she all right? Asked a frantic Apache. Behind them was Chad. She's in there, Ichigo said, pointing to the room. My dad's helping her as best he can. Don't worry, I'm sure she'll be. Ah, Ichigo gulped and his face turned white, hoping that his dad would be able to help her through this. He gasped when Mila Rose put her hands on his throat and started strangling him. You did this to her, you bastard! Shouted the angry Amazon. I'm going to make you pay for every second of pain she suffers. Mila Rose continued strangling Ichigo until Chad put a hand on her shoulder. Please stop, he told her. It won't help Harribel. The Arrancar stared at the young man before sighing. Fine, you're lucky I'm tired from earlier, she said before letting go of Ichigo. I'll punch you when this is over. Ichigo slumped to the floor, nursing his sore neck before Chad helped him up. How've you been, Chad? He noticed his friend's disheveled appearance. His clothes were torn and he was covered in bruises. What kind of training have they been putting you through? Oh, that was just from about an hour ago, Sung Sun said, hiding a smile behind her sleeve. Mila Rose decided to put him through an endurance test. Isn't that right, big man? She teased. Ichigo looked at Chad, who could only blush while staring at the floor. For what seemed like an eternity the group waited and waited. Harribel continued to yell in pain while Isshin and Yuzu, who joined her father as a nurse, tried to help her as best they could. Ichigo sat on the floor, wondering both hopefully and fearfully. What would become of their child? Would Harribel be okay? Kazuki may have been able to keep the captains at bay, but that barrier couldn't hold them forever. What would happen when they reported Ichigo's defiance to the other Soul Reapers? The boy's mental torment ended when he noticed that he could no longer hear Harribel's screams. He looked up and walked to the door, opening it. Dad, is she okay? Then he heard it. A baby's cries. On the bed lay Harribel, back in her gigai, sweating and panting for breath while wearing a hospital gown. By her side was Yuzu, wiping her sweaty forehead with a rag. In front of her was Isshin, and in his hands was a small bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. Turning towards his son, Isshin beamed with pride. It's a girl. He handed Ichigo the bundle. You've a daughter, Ichigo. Taking the baby from his father, Ichigo looked down at his child and felt his heart melt with joy. He walked over to Harribel and knelt down. Harribel, look, she's beautiful. The baby took its first cries, warming her parents' hearts. Harribel couldn't hold back the tears of joy as she held her baby girl. She shared her dark mocha skin complexion. When she opened her eyes, she smiled up at Ichigo. She has your eyes. She's adorable, Ichigo smiled. And he breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that the baby had no mask fragment on her face or a hollow hole. She's okay, Ichigo thought, breathing a sigh of relief. What should we name her? Ichigo thought about it for a few minutes. So much had happened that he hadn't taken the time to think about a name for the baby. He scratched his head as he thought of a good name. As he contemplated, he looked out the window and watched the sun rise, dawn breaking on the horizon. Rising, an idea popped into Ichigo's head. How about Asahi? Asahi. Harribel tasted the name on her tongue and smiled. I like it, Asahi. She hugged her baby. Asahi. Oh Masaki, chimed in Ishin, hugging the poster on the wall. We've a beautiful granddaughter. I'm so happy. Karen, Chad and the Trace Bestia entered, all fawning over the baby. She's so cute, squealed the three Arankars at once. The family continued to welcome their new member as the sun began to rise. Ichigo felt a wave of happiness hit him. He didn't know what his future would bring, but he knew that he would protect his daughter. He would protect everyone, no matter what. Chapter 27. The next day, Ichigo's house. Little Asahi Kurosaki was asleep in her crib. Ichigo stood over his daughter and smiled down at her. On the other side of the room Harribel slept, needing to rest from her strenuous childbirth. Attached to her arm was a device Kazuki had attached to her which was similar to the one he used to give Ichigo's energy to Harribel. The device helped stabilize Harribel's spiritual pressure. The strain of giving birth to a baby that had been feeding off her life force was heavy. Even with Ishin and Kazuki's help it would be a while before Harribel would completely recover from her ordeal. Looking down at his daughter, Ichigo smiled. But behind the smile was a head full of doubt and worry. He was 15 and already a father. Asahi's conception and growth inside Harribel had been so fast that Ichigo hardly had any time to process the fact that his mentor and friend was pregnant. He reached down and gently grabbed his baby's hand. I'll protect you, I promise, he silently swore. Hearing the door open behind him, Ichigo turned, expecting his dad or his sisters. His eyes widened with shock, however, when he saw Captain Hitsugaya standing in the doorway. Toshiro. The white-haired captain ignored Ichigo's usual disregard for his title and merely stared at the boy. Hello, Ichigo. He glanced over at the crib and at the sleeping baby within. That's my daughter, Asahi, Ichigo said, making sure to keep himself between Toshiro and the baby. So Kazuki let you out. He opened his barrier this morning. He looked at Asahi for a moment before seeing Harribel awaken, her emerald eyes narrowed at him. Let's speak outside. Ichigo followed him out into the hallway and closed the door behind him. And the others? Zaraki returned to the Soul Society on the head captain's orders. With 3 captains gone we can't divide our forces for now and he's a vital asset needed to defend the Seraiti. Besides, he got hurt a little when Kazuki dropped him into that shattered shaft of his. You know, it's funny when it happens to someone else. Captain Unohana was able to convince Byakuya and Soifon to let me talk to you and to see your child before they decide to act on the head captain's orders. Ichigo shivered, remembering Soifon's threat to kill him after he openly defied her and showed the captains that he was more than willing to go against their orders. I suppose they're pissed at me, huh? That's putting it mildly. Toshiro crossed his arms. You should have done as we asked, Ichigo. We really weren't going to hurt Harribel while she was giving birth. He sighed before looking at the door that Asahi and Harribel were in. The child, is it? My daughter is a human, Ichigo told the captain. She's completely human. Is she? Toshiro asked with a raised eyebrow. He reached into his pocket. Ichigo grew concerned when the Soul Reaper pulled out a red glove from his pocket, the same glove that Rukia used to remove Ichigo from his human body before Yukataki gave him the combat pass. I have to make sure. The head captain's orders were clear. Your teacher gave birth in a Gigai, so your baby has a human shell. I need to see her soul. The captain didn't even get the chance to take a step forward before Ichigo barred his path. No, he adamantly told the boy as he put on the glove. The captain and the substitute stared each other down for a tense moment. Becoming frustrated by Ichigo's continued defiance, Toshiro slammed his fist against the wall in a rare show of anger. Damn it, Ichigo, you are not making this any easier. He pointed a finger at Ichigo. Listen to me, Ichigo. We want to trust you. We want to consider you a friend and ally. We wanted to believe you when you told us that you're just a teenager who's a victim of circumstance. But not only have you proved to be untrustworthy, you constantly challenge our authority at every turn. His finger turned to the room, to where Harribel rested. Do you realize the danger you're in? Do you? Of course I do, Ichigo retorted, getting angry himself from Toshiro's accusations. But Toshiro only shook his head. No, you don't. Right now you have a woman. Toshiro stopped himself. No, a hollow, who not only knows all your strengths and weaknesses, but has allowed you to become so attached to her. You've blinded yourself to the possibility that she is still in league with Aizen. Barragan tried to kill her. And yet, she lives, Toshiro pointed out, crossing his arms. And have you forgotten that Aizen manipulated the events of Rukia's execution? From the moment Renji and Byakuya found her to the second that he slipped away from the Soul Society with Jin and Tosen, Aizen was in complete control over everything that happened. You were nothing but a cog in his plan. For all you know, everything that has happened between you and Harribel has been a part of his greater schemes. And you're grasping at straws. Ichigo balled his hands into fists, ready to slug the boy. She's had every opportunity to hand me and our child over to Aizen. Yes, and she took the opportunity to make you more hollow. Toshiro's stern expression became harder as he thought back to the sacrilege he'd witnessed yesterday. Do you know what we saw yesterday when you hollow-feet? We saw something that horrified us. What you did flew in the face of everything we've fought against for thousands of years. A shiver ran down his spine when he remembered the hollow-feet Ichigo. Hollows are not evil by definition. That much is true, but that power that they wield is as black as night. It's a power that Aizen coveted so much he betrayed every single one of his friends and comrades for, and now it's a power that you willingly allowed to taint your soul. I had no choice. I had my inner hollow before I came to the Soul Society because of Kazuki's training. Harribel only helped me control it, to keep it from devouring my mind and taking me over. There was no other way. Is there? Once again Toshiro shook his head. If Kazuki Urahara created your hollow powers, then he should know how to remove them, or at the very least seal them away so that you weren't corrupted by them. Toshiro saw the skepticism in Ichigo's eyes and scowled back. Did you even think about turning to him for help? Knowing his experience with the Hogyoku, I'm certain he could have helped you had you only asked. Instead, you allowed Harribel to convince you to become closer to a hollow than a soul reaper. Every law and lesson that I've ever been taught demands that I kill you, here and now, before you use that power for your own ends, he grimly concluded. Clenching his teeth, Ichigo tried his hardest to ignore the compulsion to punch the captain. That's wishful thinking and you know it. His voice was low as he tried to contain his rage at Toshiro's accusations. If Kazuki could have helped me with my inner hollow, he would have said something when I came back from the Soul Society. Taking a deep breath, Ichigo tried to calm down. He couldn't lose his cool and give Toshiro any reason to attack him. Toshiro, I am not your enemy. You have to see that. Sighing, Toshiro shook his head. I wish I could believe that, Ichigo. But it became very clear to the five of us yesterday that you aren't a soul reaper. He looked back at the room with Harribel and Asahi, something else. And that's terrifying. He decided to try to calm down too and took a deep breath. Ichigo, will you please step aside? He asked with sincere eyes. I have to do my duty. And what will you do if she isn't a normal soul? Kill her, Ichigo accused. You guys seem to be pretty quick to kill things at a moment's notice. Toshiro remembered Ichigo's remark from earlier. I won't deny that, we sometimes jump to conclusions. That's an understatement, but we only do what we think is best. He put on the glove. Ichigo, I promise that I. That's enough, Toshiro. The boys turned around to see Isshin standing in the hallway, his eyes staring intently at the pair. While Ichigo was more or less indifferent to see his father, Toshiro stared at the man with stunned eyes. See, Captain, he gasped, unable to believe his eyes. He rubbed his eyes to make sure he wasn't seeing things. Captain Shiba. Ishin gave his former third seat a smile and walked over to them. Long time no see, Toshiro. You've grown a bit since I last saw you. Wait, Shiba, Ichigo repeated, confused. Dad, you're a Shiba. Kurosaki was your mom's name. I'll tell you later. Ishin stood in front of the captain and crossed his arms. Toshiro. Ishin stopped himself when he noticed the his haori, on his back. Captain Hitsugaya, he addressed. Toshiro blushed at being properly addressed by his former captain, unable to mask the pride he was feeling. I know that you have a sense of duty to do your job, but remember what I taught you. Silence filled the hallway for a moment. Toshiro searched his memories. Under Captain Shiba, he'd learned many things but didn't know the specific lesson he was referring. Sir. Sometimes we have to trust our gut rather than the rules, Ishin told him. I know that you have your duty to do, Toshiro. But deep down, I know that you believe that Ichigo is not your enemy. Ichigo stared at his father, having never really seen this side of him. The way he brought Toshiro to heel with just his mere presence was something to be admired. Ishin held out his hand. Why don't we compromise, Toshiro? Give me the glove and I'll check. For a few moments Toshiro was still as a statue, staring at his former captain while battling the conflicting emotions he was feeling. It seemed like every time he dealt with Ichigo, things got more and more complicated. But he knew Ishin. He was a good man and an honorable man. Captain Shiba may have been irresponsible, but when he was serious, Toshiro could always put his faith in him. You'll tell me the truth? He asked as he reluctantly handed the soul-removing glove over to the Kurosaki father. Do you trust me? Ishin asked in a very paternal tone, like he was whenever he had a heart-to-heart with Ichigo when he was younger. I want to, Toshiro admitted. But, I've so many questions. Toshiro remembered the chaos that surrounded Captain Shiba's disappearance. The frantic days of him and Rangaku coming the world of the living for him, the turmoil that befell the squad as they tried to deal with the captain vanishing and the grim acceptance they all had to swallow that Ishin had likely died. Seeing the man alive and well, and the father of Ichigo Kurosaki no less, raised so many questions and brought up so much emotion that Toshiro didn't know what was what anymore. Ishin's voice cut through the storm of confusion beset in Toshiro's mind. Toshiro, do you remember when you first joined the academy? As Toshiro nodded to Ishin, the man continued to speak. Do you remember how terrified everyone was of you? I do, Toshiro quietly said, lowering his head. Didn't we give you a chance? Toshiro put his hand on the boy's shoulder. Give Ichigo a chance to be a friend. Like we did for you. The warmth of Ishin's presence and the kindness of his words won Toshiro over. He looked up and gave his former captain a small smile. Okay, but you are going to explain yourself when this is over. I promise. No doubt Rangaku will be eager to see you again once I inform her you're still alive. Ishin laughed while putting on the glove. Yeah. After over 15 years I'm really in for a scolding. Ha ha ha. He walked past Ichigo and gave his son a friendly smile before entering Harribel and Asahi's room. The two in the hallway waited. With Ishin's departure the warm atmosphere in the hallway faded away. Both Ichigo and Toshiro looked at each other awkwardly for a moment. So, Ichigo started, breaking the ice. My dad was your captain. So it would appear, Toshiro said. Rangaku is going to give him one hell of a slap when she sees him. Why, was she his lieutenant too? Yeah, but it's a bit more complicated than that. Ishin opened the door and stepped out again. Woo, he breathed. He ran a hand through his hair before taking off the glove. I thought Harribel was going to skin me alive. She's like that, Ichigo told his father amusingly. And, well, Toshiro impatiently insisted, she's human. She had a chain of fate like an ordinary soul. I don't know what powers she'll have when she's older, but for now, she's a normal baby girl. While Ichigo breathed a sigh of relief, Toshiro crossed his arms. He decided to believe Ishin and take him at his word. But there was another issue. It'll be hard to convince the other captains. And they still want to punish Ichigo for his disobedience. Toshiro, Asahi has done nothing wrong. The right to exist isn't a sin. How is that fair? He asked the boy. I suppose you're right, Toshiro relented. And since we're on the subject, Ishin crossed his arms and his expression hardened. Deliver a message to Byakuya and Soifan for me. Unless they want a battle with me, Yoruichi and Kazuki, they'll leave my son in peace. Both boys shivered from the steel in Isshin's voice. Ichigo might have heard the threat, but Toshiro felt it. He knew that Isshin was more than a match for the other captains. The fact that Ichigo was his progeny was fact enough. And the captains couldn't afford to pick another fight when the war with Aizen was looming over them like a dark cloud. Even he knew that this was a fight they couldn't pick. I'll let them know. He bowed respectfully in front of Isshin. It is good to see you again, Captain Shiba. Call me Isshin. You're the captain now. And speaking of which, Ichigo watched in amazement while Isshin lifted up the boy proudly. Hey, Toshiro blushed, the nostalgia not lost on him. Look at you. I knew you'd make captain before Rangaku. The man praised. Toshiro's legs dangled as he fought the embarrassment. Isshin, put me down, he cried out. A new voice came in out of nowhere and interrupted the three. Captain, are you okay? The three turned to see Rangaku Matsumoto slipping through the window at the end of the hall. I started to get worried. Did Ichigo? Her voice trailed off when she saw the man holding her captain. See Captain Shiba, she gaped. Hey, Rangaku, miss me. Isshin put Toshiro down before turning to his former lieutenant. He looked her up and down and smiled. I'm glad to see you haven't changed much. The strawberry blonde was silent as she stared in disbelief. But as soon as she remembered to put her brain back into her head, she stormed over to the man. Ichigo and Toshiro winced as Rangaku raised her hand and gave Isshin a harsh slap. Miss me, that's all you have to say. We were supposed to go on a date and you skipped out on me. Rangaku, ow, I can explain. Yow. Isshin started to flee down the hallway, Rangaku following him to smack him more. Ichigo turned to Toshiro, obviously confused. What was that all about? Rangaku was Isshin's lieutenant, and they were also dating at the time he disappeared. Wait, so Rangaku was his ex-girlfriend? Yeah. Harribel stepped out of her room and frowned, a crying Asahi in her arms. What is all the noise? You woke up Asahi. Toshiro took his leave quietly, avoiding Harribel's sharp gaze. Ichigo turned to his mentor and lover before shrugging. Just dealing with Toshiro. I don't think he and the other captains will be a problem. Good. And while your father was checking Asahi, he agreed to watch over her while we're gone. Gone? What do you mean? And shouldn't you be resting? My high-speed regeneration has already seen to the needs of my body. Though I do not have the best regenerative abilities of the Espada, that honor belongs to another. As long as nothing vital is damaged, I can recover to full capacity with a day's rest or two. She handed her baby over to Ichigo. Rocking his crying baby in his arms, Ichigo looked back to Harribel. You're going to train with me. But what about Asahi? Like I said, your father and your sisters will watch over her. Through me, you've learned much and gained great power. Now is the time to hone that power. And more than that, I must also grow and reach new heights if I'm to fight with you. My defeat at Barragan's hands has shown me the limits of the powers that Aizen gifted me. But you were, yes, I was still carrying Asahi and the strain took its toll on my body. But even so, I should still have been able to fight better. Now that I've given birth, I'm free to grow beyond what I was. Together with you, she smiled. Ichigo smiled back. Harribel's confident nature always helped dispel any fears he might have. And he saw firsthand how powerful his mentor was, even if she was handicapped. Ichigo was very curious to see how powerful his teacher could become. And he also couldn't deny that a more powerful Harribel was a very tempting idea. Okay, let's go, Ichigo told her. Let's. The two headed into the rest of Ichigo's house. As Ichigo handed Asahi over to his sisters, he saw Rangaku and his father in the kitchen, the former hitting the latter over the head with her sandal. Mind telling me what that's all about? Harribel asked with a raised eyebrow. I'll tell you later. Chapter 28. Kazuki's Underground Lair. Master and pupil climbed down the ladder into the crafty shopkeeper's secret training room. Fearful of any captains watching, Ichigo looked around but saw no sign of Byakuya and Soifan. Wonder where the captains are? He wondered out loud as he followed Harribel. The voice of Kazuki answered him. I kicked them out. After the past few days I decided that it would be unwise to keep them so close to you two and Asahi. I made it very clear to all of them that they are no longer welcome here. They're staying in different places. I believe Hana asked Orihime if she and Azane could stay with her. Soi Fan and Omaeda are staying at a hotel. I'm not sure where Byakuya and his lieutenant went though. Toshiro said he might ask your dad if they could stay at your place so he and Rangaku could reconnect with their captain. Wait, my subordinates are staying with Orihime right now. Having Soul Reapers and Arankars under the same roof might be a bad idea, would it not? Harribel asked, remembering that the Trace Bestia were still living with Orihime. Hana and Azane are aware of your fractions. They promised not to cause any problems for them. Besides, Toshiro thought that perhaps by getting to know an Arankar, they might understand your decision to stand by Harribel. But Ichigo wasn't quite sure that 2 Soul Reapers staying with his friend while the volatile servants of Harribel were still there was such a good idea. Especially after he pissed off the captain already. I'm still not sure that's a good idea. Harribel put a hand on his shoulder. The captain doesn't strike me as someone who will cause a fuss. And my girls know better than to cause trouble for Orihime. I'm sure they'll be fine. We have other matters to focus on right now. Kazuki looked from Harribel to Ichigo and nodded. Right, I'll leave you two alone. If anything happens topside I'll let you know. He walked past the two and headed for the ladder. Have fun. Ichigo merely scowled at the man. I can never understand that guy. And where's Yoruichi? He looked around but saw no sign of the purple-haired werecat. Gesturing for Ichigo to follow her, Harribel walked towards the center of the chamber. She is irrelevant, Ichigo. Focus on the present. We're here to train, not to ponder our allies' whereabouts. The way she talked showed that her pregnancy had not dulled the steel in her voice. It bothered Ichigo that she referred to Yoruichi and Orihime as allies, rather than friends, but he remembered that she was always standoffish. So what are we going to do? Keeping her back to him, Harribel slowly reached for her sword. Do you really need to ask? We'll train the way we've always trained. She pulled it out and turned around. The stern determination that had been present when she first met Ichigo returned. We will spar, like hollows. Her sword glowed yellow. Harribel took a stance and felt her body's honed reflexes take over. Ichigo put up a defensive stance just before she lunged for him. Clashing steel rang throughout the underground chamber. Ichigo braced himself as he skidded backwards. Harribel was coming at him harder than she ever had before, even before he left for the Soul Society. Damn, she's tougher than ever. He was forced on the defensive, pushed backwards by every blow. The sheer impact of each connection rattled his bones as their blades danced. Gripping Zangetsu with both hands, he swung hard at Harribel. The espada deftly evaded the chop and went back on the attack. What's wrong? She chastised as she forced Ichigo back. You're stronger than this. Anger started to build inside of her. Ichigo was holding back and she was not going to have any of it. Jumping back, Ichigo hurled a Getsuga Tensho at Harribel. You're stronger than before. I wasn't ready. Harribel caught Ichigo's blast and redirected it with her hand. I taught you better than that. You're letting the past few weeks go to your head. She was a little offended by how lightly Ichigo was taking her. She lowered her sword and undid her jacket, showing her espada tattoo to remind her pupil who she was. I held back while I was training you because you were as fragile as a newborn. When we began your training I had to suppress my spiritual pressure just to stop myself from killing you with my presence alone. But you were not the novice substitute I first met. You've met and fought dangerous opponents and had overcome them. You even stood up to Berrigan and his fraction. She pointed her sword at Ichigo. Show me the fruit of my labors. I will not hold back anymore. I can't. She shook her head. We have to grow together, Ichigo. And that can only happen if you fight me seriously. I'm your lover. I'm the mother of your child. But I will not let sentimentality stop us. So I'll say this only once. Her stern gaze softened. Bare your fangs to me. Shame burned Ichigo's heart. He had come to think of her as vulnerable and needing of protection after their defeat at Berrigan's hand and her carrying their child. But Harribel was not just his friend. She was a warrior. And it was wrong to think less of her just because their relationship had gone further than master and pupil. He couldn't give her anything less than his all. She deserved that much. He hung his head in shame for a moment before looking back up. I'm sorry, Harribel. He gripped his sword tightly as he stood before her. The determined expression behind her mask emboldened Ichigo. I'm going to get serious now. I expect nothing less. Harribel gripped her sword and adopted the same stance. Come. This time when the fighters met, Ichigo did not let himself get rattled by Harribel's strength. After a few connected slashes, they both decided to up their game. Both of them were very familiar with each other's fighting style by now. So they decided to mix it up. Ichigo jumped backward and let go of his Zanpakuto. Harribel was baffled by such a careless decision until she saw Ichigo grab the cloth attached to the hilt of his Zanpakuto. Ichigo whipped the sword over his head like a flail before hurling it at Harribel. Goo! She grunted as the blade slammed into hers, sending her skidding backwards. Alternating between his usual swordsmanship and his flail technique, Ichigo kept Harribel at a distance. Harribel fired a volley of ballast at Ichigo, only for him to use his flail strategy to create a whirling shield around him. Most impressive, Ichigo. Where did you come up with that? She asked. Her sword glowed yellow when energy poured into it and she shot a projectile at her friend. Aura Azul. Ichigo retaliated the attack with a Getsuga Tensho. My hollow used it when I first fought it. I hadn't really thought about using Zangetsu outside of my usual style before. But while I was training on my Bankai I realized I had to learn to fight differently. Very good. Your battle with Baragon's minions exposed your fighting style. Varying your technique will catch them off guard. I'm impressed by your ingenuity, she praised. I'm not done, Ichigo smirked. He held his sword out in front of him. I told you I was going all out. Ban, Kai. Ichigo's spiritual pressure soared and he was enshrouded by a cloud of dust. When he reappeared, he was clad in a black jacket, wielding a black Zanpakuto. Ah, I remember now, Harribel nodded as she remembered to the day Baragon shot up. So that is your Bankai. Ichigo swung his sword and cleared the dust around him with his sword's spiritual pressure. Tensa Zangetsu. He pointed his sword at Harribel, and then disappeared. The blonde woman spun around and countered Ichigo's flanking strike. Ichigo had told her about his Bankai's enhanced speed and now Harribel could see the result of his training with Yoruichi. Ichigo was a blur, darting left and right to try to distract Harribel. But Ichigo's rise in speed was not all that impressive to the Espada. His spiritual pressure has risen but his speed isn't as fast as he thinks it is. It might overwhelm a Soul Reaper captain but if I can keep up with him then so can the other Espada. She proved her point when she ducked another swing from Ichigo. Moving so fast, Ichigo had no way to defend himself when Harribel's fist connected with his ribs. Gah! Your Bankai raises your speed but it is only a mild boost, Harribel chastised. Maybe, but it also allows me to do this. He stabbed at Harribel with his sword. She moved to block but Ichigo deftly dipped his sword slightly lower than Harribel anticipated. She was unable to react before the blade slipped through the hollow inside of her sword and he pulled hard, yanking the sword out of her grasp. But any chance Ichigo had of capitalizing on disarming Harribel wasn't even fleeting. She opened her hands and a Acero blossomed in her hands. Smirking behind her mask, she blasted Ichigo at point-blank range with her attack. When her blast faded and nothing stood before her, Harribel chuckled. I stand corrected. Your speed seems to be good enough after all. She turned her head to see Ichigo behind her, standing on a boulder. Had you not been fast enough, you might not have gotten away unharmed. A tiny wisp of smoke came from Ichigo's shoulder from getting singed. Not fast enough, he winced. You really aren't holding back. He knew that Harribel's Acero could have seriously hurt him. That was how clear it was to him how serious Harribel was taking this. True, but you have room to grow. Harribel turned around and gave Ichigo her full attention, her grip on her sword loosening. Aizen told me that it takes captains over 10 years to master their Bankai. You still have yet to achieve your Bankai's full potential. What is Aizen's Bankai anyway? Ichigo asked. The captains and the others don't know since they were fooled by his Shikai. If Ichigo was looking for answers, Harribel's solemn headshake told him there were none to be found. Sadly I do not. Aizen made his Shikai known to us but his Bankai is a secret only known to himself. I have doubts that Konami or Jin know of his ultimate power either. She held her sword out and pointed it down in a familiar pose. But whatever his power is, we will overcome it together. Hunt. Tiburon. A torrent of water surrounded her, transforming her into her release state. Despite the seriousness of their sparring, Ichigo couldn't help but blush from the revealing nature of her resurrection. Compared to Berrigan's men, her transformation is more like something out of Sailor Moon. Water splashing around her boots, Harribel hefted her massive sword and smirked when she saw the blush on her pupil's cheeks. "Like what you see?" she asked. "You know I do," Ichigo smiled. Regardless, he took up a stance. "You know that's not going to get me to lower my guard." "That's fine. I'll break through it then." She held her sword up high. "I'm not the way I was when I fought Berrigan. I'm not handicapped from carrying Asahi. You might find my strength." Her body glowed yellow. "Too much for you." When Harribel brought her sword down, Ichigo's eyes widened and a chill ran down his spine. He brought his sword up. Gah! His knees buckled and he staggered from the sheer force of her pressure. Getting back up to his feet, Ichigo charged at the woman. He turned up the speed to his limit, dozens of afterimages circling the espada. Flanking her again, he prepared to launch a black Getsuga Tensho. Getsuga. Lagoda. Harribel spun around and shot a burst of water at Ichigo. The blast was blocked but the force sent Ichigo skidding backwards. As soon as Harribel went on the attack, Ichigo found himself back on the defensive again. Now at full power, Harribel was battering Ichigo into submission. Ichigo blocked with his sword again and again, knocked backwards with every other blow. Gritting his teeth, Ichigo prepared another Getsuga Tensho. As soon as Harribel saw the burst of energy, she jumped backwards in preparation for Ichigo to hurl the blast at her. But Ichigo charged at her with the blast still a part of his sword. Now when Ichigo clashed with her, the added power gave his attacks more of an edge. With the force of his Getsuga Tensho behind his swings, Ichigo wasn't really swinging a sword anymore. His attacks were more brutish, like he was using a club instead. Harribel dodged another swing and watched as Ichigo's black mass gouged out the earth beneath him. A creative trick, but her white sword glowed yellow. "It's fragile." So caught up in maintaining his concentration was Ichigo that he was unable to dodge Harribel's Sero. Coming from her sword, the blast's width was wider than what Ichigo was used to. Thankfully, his Getsuga Tensho went off and sent Ichigo flying backwards away from the danger. "Damn," he panted. "And here I thought I was being clever." Calmly walking towards Ichigo, Harribel shrugged her shoulders. "No, I tell my girls the same thing when training them. Creativity on the battlefield can be an advantage. But we are not here to simply discuss unique techniques created on the fly." She gestured to the panting Ichigo and then put a hand on her chest. "One of us is out of breath while the other hasn't broken a sweat. Try harder, Ichigo. You know what this exercise is truly about." Nodding, Ichigo looked down at his black blade. He was amazed by Harribel's raw strength and power. Part of him was a little scared at her full strength. Had she not came to him with her offer of apprenticeship, she would have been his enemy. Looking back up, Ichigo put a hand to his face. "Are you ready?" he asked, reaching down inside him to draw out the dark power inside him. "I don't know what will happen." "Don't hold back," Harribel instructed. "Stare into the abyss and don't look back." Closing his eyes, Ichigo summoned the power of his inner hollow. A hole opened up in his chest and his horned mask covered his face, his body slowly transforming into that of a Vastolord hollow. Opening his eyes, Ichigo looked down at his clawed hand, a tuft of red hair surrounding his wrist. "This feels strange." He looked down to inspect himself, not having the time to assess his transformation the last time. Harribel's face was impassive but behind her stoic mask she felt jubilation. Ichigo's power had skyrocketed with his newfound power. The moment where he was her equal was coming fast and she was secretly overjoyed. She noticed Ichigo was looking down at his hand and frowned. "Don't be afraid of it, Ichigo. Embrace it." "I know." He gripped his sword tightly before holding up his hand. "Here I come." A ball of red energy formed in his hand. Remembering his training on how to control his spirit energy, Ichigo managed to form the Sero and let it fly. Harribel retaliated with her own Sero, causing an explosion that shook the entire chamber. In the midst of the smoke, Ichigo charged at Harribel. This time when they met in combat, Ichigo was finally able to meet Harribel's blows without getting knocked back. Harribel finally began to feel sweat run down her face, using her sword's huge length to keep Ichigo at a distance. They jumped around the chamber, moving so fast that they could not be seen to the naked eye. As they met in midair and on the ground again and again, Ichigo soon found himself fighting more like Harribel, more like a hollow. His attacks became savage and he could feel his inner instinct guiding him rather than trying to think of his next moves. In the middle of the chamber they locked blades. Harribel stared at the darkened eyes behind Ichigo's mask as she pushed. "I thought you said never Bladalock," he teased as he pushed as hard as he could. "I did," Harribel grunted. "But didn't I also said to be wary of letting your opponent get too close?" Her body glowed yellow. At first Ichigo thought she was going to fire another point-blank arrow, but when he heard a sound above his head he looked up and gasped behind his mask. Cascada. A huge torrent of water slammed down on top of them. Harribel was able to Sonito away from her attack, but Ichigo caught the full brunt of it. Landing on a nearby rock, Harribel waited to see what became of Ichigo as the attack subsided, a small lake forming inside the chamber. The waters bubbled and out burst Ichigo. It was clear from the numerous wounds on his body that he took a heavy hit, but Harribel noted how the worst of his injuries were healing from his hollow's high-speed regeneration. He made a weak upward slash at Harribel when he got close enough, only for the espada to backflip to avoid it. However, Ichigo's attack did manage to connect with her bone skirt. Behind his mask, Ichigo blushed when his blade cut the skirt, the garment slipping away from Harribel, revealing her naked lower half. Apparently her release form did away with her panties. Stopping in his tracks, Ichigo held up his hand defensively. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." He was caught off guard when Harribel spun in midair and roundhouse kicked him in the face, his mask cracking from the force of her boot. "Ow." Frowning at Ichigo as he staggered, Harribel lowered her sword and put a hand on her hip, not bothered by her revealed womanhood. "You're distracted. That's fatal. Had that been any other Arrancar you'd be dead," she chastised. "I'm sorry, I just got distracted. I wasn't intending to cut off your skirt, that's all. And you think that matters to me? Ichigo, I'm offended." Her frown deepened and her hand reached for one of the fragments covering her breasts. "Do I strike you as someone who will freeze up just because of a wardrobe malfunction? Don't lump me in with your friends." She gripped her fragment tightly before continuing to speak. "A lesson for you. 1. You shouldn't care if I'm naked or not. You've already seen me naked before. Hell, you watched me give birth. And 2. She ripped off her fragment, exposing her breast to Ichigo. Modesty has little place in Mortal Kombat. She reached for her other fragment and ripped it off. It may have hurt like hell for her to do such an act, but she felt it was worth proving a point. I am not the only female Arrancar. And I know several others who are more sadistic. If you showed the same weakness you just showed me, they'd have killed you in seconds." She gripped her sword and pointed it at Ichigo. "Ichigo, I am your master and I am a woman. But I will not allow something like losing my skirt to distract me when my life's on the line. And neither should you." Once again, Ichigo felt ashamed for thinking less of Harribel. He nodded and tried to calm the blood that was rushing to his loins from seeing her in all her glory. If anything, she looked sexier with her boots and gloves still on. "I'm sorry, Harribel, I understand what you're saying. I hope so. Since I need to beat it into your head." She put up a stance while standing in the nude. "I'll fight you as I am now." She lunged for Ichigo with her sword in hand. Ichigo countered her strikes but discovered that Harribel was capable of changing her attack style on the fly as well. Despite the absurd size of her sword, she spun around, cartwheeled and fought with a grace that reminded Ichigo of a dancer. He swung at her, but Harribel somersaulted over his head and kicked him in the side, sending him flying. He hit the ground and groaned as he skidded to a halt, picking himself up from the ground. Even as he made his way to his feet, cracks were forming in Ichigo's mask. Harribel charged and Ichigo put up a defense. But Harribel could tell that Ichigo was running out of steam. He was holding his ground, but his counterattacks were losing their edge. Gripping his sword with both hands, Ichigo hauled back and readied another attack. "Getsuga, Tench. Enough." Harribel held up a hand to stop Ichigo. "That's enough. You're almost at your limit. We're done for the day," she told him, panting even though she fared better in their spar than her student. "Your power is strong, but you aren't used to it. With time, you'll be able to maintain it longer and use it better. But for now we're calling it a day." Though it chafed Ichigo to do so, he had to admit that Harribel was right. His body felt sluggish and his mask felt heavy. Stabbing Tensa Zangetsu into the ground, he slumped against a boulder and sighed. "You're right, I'm tired. This form takes a lot out of me. In time, you'll get used to it. Try to maintain it as long as you can so you can know your limits." Turning around, Harribel walked away, heading to her discarded skirt. With her back to Ichigo, the Espada was unaware of the eyes staring at her ass as she walked away. Stabbing her sword in the ground next to Ichigo's Zanpakuto, Harribel pondered on her student's progress. Ichigo was becoming stronger by the day. In such a short amount of time his power had grown leaps and bounds. After all of his experiences he was almost as powerful as her. He was truly the definition of a prodigy. Wiping the sweat from her brow, Harribel couldn't help but ask the question that bothered her the most. How do I get stronger then? On that night so many months ago when she witnessed Ichigo gain his powers, Harribel had found someone who could become her equal, the companion she'd longed for so long. Part of her wanted to see her student surpass her, but she was still a warrior. She wanted to grow alongside him. If Ichigo was the only one whose power grew, their chances of surviving Aizen, the other Espadas and the captains was slim. Now that they had the burden of parenthood added to the mix, Harribel had to surpass the limitations that shackled her. But how? Reaching her fallen skirt, Harribel bent over and continued to ruminate. How can I grow stronger? Simple training might not be enough. Maybe. She stopped when she grabbed her skirt when a thought hit her. Ichigo is a soul reaper. He grew to his limits with his Zanpakuto powers and then became more like a hollow. I am a hollow who evolved through breaking my mask. Could the answer be, for me to become more like a soul reaper? The naked master and student slid down to the ground, both of them panting and sweating. Regaining her composure quickly, Harribel sat up and turned her head. I hope you don't expect all our training spars to end like this. No, but it was worth it, Ichigo smiled. We should head back. I want to make sure Asahi's okay. She got up and held out a hand to help Ichigo up to his feet. I don't like the idea of those two soul reapers so close to us, Ichigo, she frowned. As Ichigo clothed himself, Harribel resealed her sword and her clothes returned to her. I trust them even less than you do. Even if they have a connection with your father, it doesn't sit well with me. Or with that captain staying with Orihime and my girls. I know, but we don't have much of a say in the matter, Ichigo relented. I'm just as worried as you are. But maybe they'll see things from my point of view if they stay with Arankars. You may have a point. But it still puts me on edge. I will not allow any of the captains to be anywhere near our baby. Understand? I was going to say the same thing myself. Sheathing her sword, Harribel nodded. Then let's hurry home. The two quickly left the chamber, heading back up the ladder to exit the shop. Unfortunately for the pair, they'd been so lost in fucking like horny animals that they'd failed to notice the pair that had been watching them from behind another boulder. Turning to his partner in crime, Kazuki grinned. Did you get that? In Yoruichi's hand was a camera. Yoruichi's grin was wider than Kazuki's. Every second of it, she hit a button and the camera stopped recording. Oh, this is going to be sweet. Ichigo just gave us the best blackmail material, she cheekily laughed. We'll have to use it wisely, Kazuki said chuckling. I'd hate for Ms. Harribel to get angry. Worth it, Yoruichi smirked as she hit rewind and started to watch the fun all over again. Meanwhile, Orihime's apartment. Orihime walked to her apartment door with a bag full of groceries in her arms. With 5 women now staying at her small apartment, Orihime was in need of more food. Thankfully, when Unohana approached her and asked if she and Azane could stay with her, the captain had generously offered to pay rent for their stay, giving Orihime a large amount of money. I hope everything's okay in there, she muttered worriedly while putting the key in the door. I tried to tell them no, but a shiver ran down her spine from her conversation with Unohana. Orihime looked down at the cash in her hands. She stood in front of her apartment with Unohana, Azane standing behind her captain dutifully. The Oranget was amazed at the amount. The Soul Society didn't use human currency, so where'd she get this kind of money? We'd be happy to pay for our own expenses and we'll try not to cause any trouble. Won't you take us in, Orihime? Unohana politely asked. It's very generous of you, Captain Unohana. But Harribel's fractions are staying here. It might not be. All the more reason to be there and make sure you're in no danger, Yunohana merely replied. But, Orihime felt a dark chill in the air as Yunohana's smile widened, her kindly persona turning almost demonic. Won't you take us in? Why yes, ma'am, thank you, my dear. Unlocking her door, Orihime opened it up and prepared herself for the worst. She was caught off guard, however, at the sight of flowers in her living room. What's all this? Yunohana was sitting in the middle of the room, the Trace Bestia on the couch. When the four turned to her, Yunohana smiled and gestured. Well, I needed to find some common ground with your new friends. So I decided to teach them a little about flower arranging. You girls like flowers? Orihime asked. Sung-sun nodded. We don't really have much of greenery in Hawako Mundo. Flowers have always been something we liked. That and it's impossible to say no to this broad, Apache mumbled. What was that? Yunohana asked, smiling despite the fiery gleam in her eyes. Nothing, all three said. Orihime couldn't help but scratch the back of her head. I guess they can't say no either, huh? Chapter 29. 2 days later, Kazuki's underground chamber. Harribel sat on a boulder, sitting cross-legged with her eyes closed while she was deep in meditation. She was taking a break from her isolated training, giving Ichigo some time to rest from the past few days of grueling training. Harribel was doing her best to get Ichigo to master his holification and wasn't holding back at all. Next to the boulder was her sword. She didn't bother laying it in her lap or sheathing it as if she were performing Jinzen. As she explained to Ichigo, she didn't have an inner world like he did. Unlike the Soul Reapers, an Arrancar's Zanpakuto was not a reflection of one's soul but a separate portion of her power that had been separated from her body when Aizen had removed her mask. She equated the power of her Resurrection to be the equivalent of a Soul Reaper's Bankai. But that comparison posed a serious dilemma for the Espada. A Soul Reaper's Bankai was the final stage of a Soul Reaper's training. After that, their powers would hit their peak. And if Resurrection was the Arrancar's equivalent to Bankai, then did that mean that Harribel had already reached her peak? The woman balled her fists in frustration. She was strong and knew she could get stronger. But her progress could only increase her power by small increments. Not like the leaps and bounds of progress that Ichigo had made in the few months of training he had been given. Harribel was a proud woman, but she knew her honor would remain intact if Ichigo surpassed her strength. But the thought of Ichigo fighting Aizen alone made her stomach tighten in fear. Or worse, she thought to herself. What if Ichigo and I fight Aizen together, and I end up as dead weight? The idea of becoming a burden to Ichigo because she wasn't strong enough, much like her pregnancy had caused her during the past few weeks, threatened to enrage Harribel. No, I will not be a burden to anyone. Not to Ichigo, not to my fractions, not to Asahi. I will get stronger. I must get stronger. But how? Pondering on her dilemma more, Harribel had an idea. If Soul Reapers can achieve a second state of release, she said out loud to nobody in particular. Then could it be that I can achieve such a state too? The more she thought about it, the more she wondered how she could manage such a power. Getting up off the rock, Harribel took hold of her Zanpakuto and gathered her spirit energy. Tiburon. A large splash of water and a burst of energy later and Harribel changed into her release state. Harribel raised a gloved hand and focused her spirit energy. Strong. I should be able to hold my own against Barragan. But what then? She grimaced as she visualized the other Espadas in front of her. Can I best start on my own? Or Yami should his power be fully unleashed by the time the battle begins? She started to swing her sword around, visualizing her opponents. And do I stand a chance against Jin and Tosen? Ichigo said he fought Jin to a standstill back in the Soul Society before he knocked him back with his Shikai. But even I know that Jin was holding back at the time. And if Tosen is committed to Lord Aizen's cause, then there's a chance that he would allow himself to undergo holification. Besting them will be difficult. And what about Lord Aizen? She stopped swinging and imagined Sosuke Aizen standing in front of her, smiling at her with his usual smirk and knowing eyes. She remembered when Aizen had rescued her from the hammerhead Arrancar that came close to killing her in the Trace Bestia. She never admitted it back then, but Aizen's strength scared her. And it still scared her. I'm afraid. Her hand shook with the smallest of trembles, but her fear was apparent. She was scared of Aizen. She was afraid of what he would do to her, to Ichigo, to their child, Asahi. The thought of Asahi falling into his hands terrified her. Her trembling grew stronger. What do we do? I have already fallen under his spell. What if we fight him and he turns me against Ichigo? Harribel knew how powerful Kyoka Suigetsu was, but she had no idea how to counter it. Looking down at her trembling hand, she grimaced and fought through her terror. No, no, she threw a bala at a boulder and disintegrated it. I will overcome him. Me and Ichigo will. No matter what I have to sacrifice, I will. Harribel cut herself short when she thought about what she said. Sacrifice, she murmured. She brought her hand to her hollow hole, where her womb was supposed to be. I am the Espada of sacrifice, maybe that's the key. Deciding on a new path to focus on, Harribel continued to quietly train, her need to get stronger growing with the looming battle that was sure to come. Meanwhile, Kurosaki House. Dia, Isshin fawned as he watched his granddaughter. She's so adorable. Baby Asahi was on the floor, playing with some blocks while her grandfather watched over her. Thankfully for Ichigo and Harribel, Isshin still had Yuzu's and Karen's baby clothes and toys, so Asahi had a lot to play with. Ichigo walked into the room and knelt down in front of his daughter. The little baby looked up and reached out for her father, Ichigo picking her up and letting her touch his face. Ah, she knows her daddy. Isshin smiled at the touching sight. True, he'd always wanted to have grandchildren, but he thought that would come much later in his children's lives. Still, he wanted to appreciate the moment as it came, and he knew that his duty as Ichigo's father was to help him through such a turbulent period in his life. The little baby clung to her father. Ichigo held Asahi close as he got up and sat down in a chair, gently rocking the baby back and forth. Hey, Dad. What is it? Isshin asked as he put the baby blocks into a small box. What's going to happen to Asahi when she grows up? Ichigo looked down at the baby in his eyes and felt concern replace the joy. I mean, look at what's happened to me. I don't want to imagine little Asahi going through struggles like mine. The elder Kurosaki breathed a deep sigh and sat back in his chair. I'm afraid that only time will tell what's in store for her, Ichigo. Your mother and I wanted nothing but happiness for you and your sisters, and yet things spiraled into the shape of things they are now. I can't tell you what might happen to her as she grows and learns about her powers. She's half human, half hollow after all, just like you. Even more so since her hollow heritage comes directly from her Arankar mother. We can only watch and hope that she has a normal life once this is all over. His brow furrowed when he saw that his words hadn't assuaged Ichigo's concerns, so he decided to lighten up. Don't worry, if she's anything like you and Harribel, she'll be strong enough to handle it. And she's got two parents and her granddaddy to look after her, he reassured. Still cradling his daughter, Ichigo knew that Isshin was right. He smiled as Asahi clung to him in her slumber. I know, but I can't help but worry. Hey, congratulations, you're now a parent, Isshin joked. Ding dong. Isshin stood up and went to go see who that was. The doorbell woke up Asahi, who started crying, but Ichigo managed to calm her down. Oh hey, Ichigo, greeted Tatsuki as she walked into the room, Isshin having let her in. Hey, Tatsuki, what's up? Ichigo instinctively asked, before he saw Tatsuki staring at the baby in his arms and realized that he'd stupidly forgot to tell his classmates about his sudden fatherhood. I just came to see why you were out of school for the past few days. Everyone's been worried. Are you babysitting? Tatsuki asked. She leaned forward and smiled at the baby girl. Ah, she's so cute. For a moment, Ichigo didn't know how to break the truth to her until he realized there was absolutely no way he could sugarcoat this. Tatsuki, this is my daughter, Asahi. Tatsuki froze as she let Ichigo's words sink in. I'm sorry. What did you just say? Sighing, Ichigo decided it was time to let her in on some things. Meanwhile, Soul Society, Squad 13 training grounds. Two girls stood in the middle of a grassy field in the middle of their training. Orihime panted as she blocked Rukia's ice, dressed in her usual blouse. She'd come to the Soul Society to train with Rukia for the coming battle, Unohana promising to take care of her apartment with Azane. She was worried that she might butt heads with the Trace Bestia, but the three had taken to staying on the mountain where Ichigo had first trained with Harribel to avoid a conflict with the captain. Rukia sheathed her sword and smiled at her friend. Let's take a break. Orihime nodded, returning her spirits to her hairpins. The two friends walked over to a blanket nearby that Rukia had set up and sat down on it. Thanks for letting me come here to train with you, Orihime smiled. Setting her zanpakuto to the side, Rukia laid down on the blanket and let the cool breeze washing over her, cooling her sweaty body. I'm glad to have someone to train with. Rukia grinned at her friend. It's been a long time since I had a friendly spar. We're glad Captain Yukitake was willing to open the training grounds to us. Orihime brought her knees up to her chest as she sat next to Rukia, the wind blowing in her hair. I'm surprised he allowed me to come here, what with Ichigo and all. The captain is a reasonable man. He knows that you have as much a stake in the fight against Aizen as the rest of the Soul Society. And he also is more understanding about Ichigo than some of the others. Seeing that the topic turned to their mutual friend, Rukia decided to ask something that had been on her mind since she first questioned Ichigo about his secret mentor. Hey, Orihime, what do you think about Harribel? Orihime looked up at the sky and tried to gather her thoughts. When it came to the errand car, her heart was conflicted. Harribel is a very strong woman, she simply said. I can see why Ichigo loves her. Sitting up, Rukia stared at her friend, sensing the conflict in her eyes. But, don't you have feelings for Ichigo too? I do. I still do. Ichigo is the most wonderful person I ever met, Orihime said with a smile on her face, still looking up at the clouds. But, I know that he loves Harribel. She's special to him, and it's not because they had a baby together. I think when she trained him they developed a special bond. Rukia nodded, understanding what her friend was talking about. Ichigo loved Harribel, that much was clear to anyone. But his relationship to her wasn't simply a teenager's first love. Rukia knew from her experiences from training with Kaien about developing a deep relationship with someone that went beyond words. I understand, but she still. Earlier, when Ichigo introduced us to Harribel and told us about what happened between them, Harribel took me to the side to talk to me in private, Orihime interrupted, watching the clouds roll by. What did she say? Orihime closed her eyes and remembered talking to Harribel when the Espada pulled her to the side. It's a secret, she said with a simple smile. But I like her. She might be a hollow, but she's a remarkable woman. I can see that from how Ichigo feels about her, said a voice from behind them. Turning their heads, Rukia and Orihime saw Captain Yukitake walking towards them, a sunny smile on his face. Captain. Rukia immediately stood up and bowed. You can relax, Rukia. I'm just taking a break from the preparations, Yukitake told the girl. The two sat down on the blanket and Yukitake let the cool breeze wash over him for a moment before continuing. I heard your conversation. It seems you two are taken with Ichigo's friend. Orihime nodded. Yeah, she's quite something. Rukia looked at her captain before bringing up something that had been bugging her for a while. Captain, I think me and Orihime need to know, what's going to happen to Ichigo when this is all over? Orihime looked at Rukia concerned before looking nervously back at Yukitake. Sighing, Yukitake turned his attention to the grass swaying in the breeze. I'm not sure. Ichigo is something that the Soul Society has never experienced before. A substitute falling in love with a hollow is unlike anything we've ever heard of. And that they now have a child is also something that disturbs us greatly. Seeing the fear in Orihime's eyes, the white-haired man gave her a reassuring smile. Don't worry, you two. Ichigo has done nothing wrong. Some of the other captains may be concerned, but I trust Ichigo's judgment. Once Aizen has been defeated, Shunsui, Captain Unohana, Byakuya and I will do our best to convince Master Genryusai to leave him in peace. I could tell, even without hearing his story from his own lips, that he's been through a lot. Orihime smiled back and nodded, relieved to hear Captain Yukitake's compassion. Come on, let's get back to training, she told Rukia. Right, will you be all right, Captain Yukitake? Don't worry about me, I'll be fine just watching, he reassured her. The captain watched as the friends walked away until they were at a safe distance before they resumed sparring. Yukitake smiled at how happy Rukia seemed to be. His heart warmed at the sight of Rukia opening up to others. But as his thoughts turned to Orihime and their conversation about Ichigo, his smile disappeared and he could only sigh depressingly. After all, it always pained him to lie to people. Forgive me, Orihime. But the head captain has already decided Ichigo's fate. Nothing I say or do can save him when this is over. Meanwhile, Ichigo and Harribel's training grounds. The tranquility of the forest mountain was shattered by the constant rumbling. Mila Rose and Apache watched from a distance as they monitored Chad's training. From behind them approached Sung Sun, a bag of drinks in her hand. Here, these were all the store had, she said, handing the pop to her sisters. Standing next to them, she watched as Chad fought their pet, Aeon. And it was not going well for the human. Wow, I think Aeon is having a little too much fun. The three had done a lot to get Chad to become stronger, pushing him to his limits. After beating him within an inch of his life, they saw Chad undergo a new change, his arm transforming into a shield and his left arm as well becoming a weapon. It was clear to the Trace Bestia that Chad was somewhat akin to Ichigo, a human with the capabilities of a hollow. However, unlike Ichigo, Chad was not a soul reaper, so they had improvised his training to make him grow further. To that end, they severed their left arms and created Aeon, letting Chad fight their pet. And judging by how Aeon kept flailing Chad around like a toddler flailing its toy into the ground, Chad was not doing well. Think we should stop Aeon before he gets killed? Apache asked in between sips. Mila Rose nodded. I guess. Still, this is concerning. If he can't handle Aeon, then he can't handle us. Which means he'll be killed if he tries to fight the Espadas. I don't know, maybe we could have him fight the other Fractions. Apache suggested. Let him deal with the fodder while we and Master Harribel fight the Espadas. Don't be dumb, Sung Sun chastised. What happens if he's fighting an Arrancar and Grimmjow or Ulquiorra show up? He'll be killed instantly. Hey, who are you calling dumb? Apache turned to Mila Rose, who kept watching Chad get ragdolled. Mila Rose, tell her to shut up. Quiet, the tall woman hissed with a glare to her friend. Let Yasutora handle this on his own. We can't coddle him like Master Harribel does to Ichigo. Oh ho, already on first name basis. Sung Sun teased. Oh that's right, I forgot you like to give him endurance tests. Tell me, do you also have a bun in the oven? Mila Rose glared back at the smaller woman before turning away. Please, I simply wanted to see why Master Harribel wanted a human companion so much. Yasutora seemed like a suitable companion. Or are you jealous that I snagged him first? Yeah right, you two gorillas deserve each other, you. The three's bickering ended when they were interrupted by a loud boom. Turning to the battling Chad and Aeon, the Trace Bestia stood wide-eyed as they tried to process what was happening before their eyes. What is he doing? The three screamed. Meanwhile, Las Noches, Aizen's chamber. Aizen sat alone in his chair, listening to an Arrancar give his report. Very well, you may go, he said, waving his hand dismissively. The despot watched the Arrancar hurry out of the room, Jin walking past him and entering the room in his stead. Well now, this place seems a lot less lively without Harribel and her ladies, Jin jokingly lamented as he approached his partner in crime. And here I was so eager to see Harribel's baby. I hear she's given birth to a cute baby girl. Aizen smiled, having received news of Harribel's birth not that long ago. Yes, it seems that Harribel and Ichigo's child seems to be perfectly normal. But she was born with a human body. What she truly is remains to be seen. True, but you know that Baragon plans on taking his men to try to kill them again, Jin pointed out. I assumed as such. Baragon is too proud to wait for the appointed time to attack. It'll be the perfect test of Xyolaporo's Reishi enhancing experiment. We'll see how they fare against Yamamoto's vanguard. And it'll be a perfect opportunity to see the results of Ichigo's training with Harribel. Jin leaned back against the wall. A shame Ichigo turned down your offer though. On the contrary, Ichigo didn't refuse my offer. Aizen knew what buttons to push and a person had picked the choicest time to extend his offer to Ichigo. I made my offer to him after Yamamoto threatened him to drive him further away from the safety of the Soul Reapers. He and Harribel are alone in their fight now, even more so now that their daughter is born. Okay, but he still refused to come to Las Noches before his daughter was born. Doesn't that mean that he refused your offer? Jin said. Closing his eyes, Aizen smiled wickedly. There isn't a time limit to the deal. I merely said that Harribel could give birth in peace if he did come with me. But he didn't accept your offer though, Jin pointed out. No, he hasn't, not yet. Chapter 30. The next day. Karakura Town. The small town seemed quiet as Ichigo walked down the street, Tatsuki walking beside him. It had been a long few days for the substitute Soul Reaper. After his sudden fatherhood was revealed to Tatsuki, he had to explain everything to his best friend. It had taken him almost the whole day to tell Tatsuki the truth about Asahi, Harribel and his double life as a Soul Reaper. Tatsuki was unsurprisingly very angry at Ichigo for a lot of reasons. Had little Asahi not been in the room at the time, Tatsuki would have given him her full fury and then some. She was hurt that Ichigo would keep such important stuff in his life from his best friend, and it didn't help that Orihime also kept this from her. However, it was clear to her that Ichigo was just trying to protect her from the harsher realities of his life, and after hearing everything he'd been through she could understand. That said, she still wanted to punch him. The friends had decided to go for a walk to discuss things more. Ichigo had left Asahi in the care of his father and sisters while Harribel went to talk to Kazuki. What she wanted to discuss with him, Harribel didn't say. She only told Ichigo that it was important and vital to their upcoming battle. Tatsuki wanted to go talk to Orihime about Harribel stealing Ichigo away, but the girl was in the Soul Society training with Rukia, so that was a conversation that had to wait. I gotta say, you've changed, Tatsuki said. Never pictured you as a daddy. That must have been a shock when she showed up at your doorstep knocked up. Ichigo scratched the back of his head. Tell me about it. I thought I was going to have a heart attack right there. Tatsuki was silent for a moment before she asked what had been on her mind all day. So, are you going to marry her? The statement made Ichigo stop in his tracks. What? Ichigo's confusion made Tatsuki want to punch him more. Are you going to marry her? She repeated. For crying out loud, Ichigo. You put a baby in her and you made her leave her home. Least you could do is put a ring on her finger. What exactly are you planning on doing after this is all over? Ichigo stopped to think. I haven't really thought about it. Shaking her head, Tatsuki's sweat dropped while staring at Ichigo. Seriously. Look, a lot has happened and I haven't really thought about what to do after we beat Aizen and deal with the captains. Right now Harribel and I are just focusing on coming out of this alive. Tatsuki would have bopped Ichigo upside the head for his lack of thinking, but the expression on his face told her all she needed to know about his fears for what came next. Are you guys going to be okay? She looked down at her hands and cursed her uselessness. Ichigo was going through so much and yet she couldn't help him or Orihime at all. Don't worry, a shudder in the air stopped the pair. A massive amount of spirit energy was heading their way. Even Tatsuki could feel it. Ichigo cursed himself and grabbed his combat pass. They're here. He popped out of his human body and handed it to Tatsuki. Take my body and find somewhere safe. What about you? Asked a worried Tatsuki. Don't worry. This is what me and Harribel have been training for. And we're not alone. Our friends will help us too. Nodding, Tatsuki took hold of Ichigo's human body and watched him leap into the air. Good luck, she said as Ichigo dashed away. Ichigo steeled his nerves as he headed for the source of the disturbance. A Garganta was about to open up and he knew who was coming. I just hope the captains will help fight, he said as he moved as fast as he could. Meanwhile, Orihime's apartment. Azane was on her communicator speaking with Squad 12. Yes, thank you. She hung up and turned to her captain, already out of her gigai. The R&D department have confirmed that a large group of Arankars are coming. They'll be entering the world of the living any minute now. How big? Hana asked. The apartment was empty save for them, with Orihime in the Soul Society and the Trace Bestia staying on the mountain to train Chad. The lieutenant's expression was grave. Too many. We know that there are at least 1 or 2 Espadas but, Azane shook her head. They said that the vast majority of the Arankars' spiritual pressures were strange. Strange how? They weren't sure, but they said their spiritual pressure was similar to Ichigo Kurisaki's. Hana narrowed her eyes. That is unusual. You don't think that Ichigo? We shouldn't jump to conclusions, Hana warned. Azane popped out of her gigai and readied her sword. We should go and provide Ichigo assistance and... No, Captain and Lieutenant turned to see several figures slip in through the opened window. Captain Kuchiki, Lieutenant Abarai, where have you been? Renji and I have been keeping an eye on the town with Captain Soy Fan and Lieutenant Omeda. As if on cue, the Squad 2 captain and lieutenant slipped into the apartment to join them. Where are Captain Hitsugaya and Lieutenant Matsumoto? They are with Ichigo's family. I assume you've been informed. Soy Fan scowled. That Ichigo's father is Captain Shiba. Yes, he informed us. Just another headache for when this is over. Isshin has much to answer for. That is for another time, Renji interrupted. A bunch of Arrancars are about to come crashing into Karakura town. We should go help Ichigo and... No, Azane and Renji were surprised. It wasn't that Byakuya had said no. It was that all three captains had said no. Captain, Azane asked Unohana, why aren't we fighting? Squad 12 was able to identify one of the Espadas. It's the one who appeared before who defeated Ichigo and his hollow, Soy Fan explained, adding much disdain in her voice for that last part. Aizen and the rest of his forces are not coming. That means that the Espada who attacked Ichigo is coming for revenge. Renji couldn't believe this. Captain, even if Ichigo is their target, we should still help him. There are more Arrancars this time. Head Captain Yamamoto's orders are clear, Byakuya sternly replied. We are not to help Ichigo. After that incident, Byakuya bristled from the memory of Ichigo hollowfying. We can no longer trust him as an ally. What of Captain Hitsugaya? Unohana asked. Since Isshin was his former captain, he will try to help them despite orders. Byakuya shook his head. Our orders are clear, Renji. We are to stand by and wait to see how things progress. Unless Karakura town itself is in danger, we will not help Ichigo or his friends. Until they try to siphon the spirit enrichment zone, we will wait. Azane looked at the three captains in shock. She was not informed that this was the plan. Wait for what? Isn't it obvious? Soy Fan glared at the lieutenant. We'll wait it out and watch Ichigo, his hollow friends and the Espadas kill each other. Meanwhile, high above the town, a Garganta ripped the sky asunder and opened up to reveal the void behind it. Out of the Garganta first was Baragon. The weeks that had passed since his previous journey to the world of the living had only added kindling to the fire that was Baragon's rage. Hatred seethed out of every inch of the kingly Arrancar as he stood over the town, his eyes staring right at Ichigo Kurosaki's house. There will be no escape this time, traitor. Behind him walked Xiaolaporo, a white cape draped around his slender form. I must say, this is even better than I expected. He used his pesquisa to detect the presence of multiple powerful entities. So many subjects to experiment on. I must say, your decision to give up the first time has really worked out in my favor. The look Baragon shot the pink-haired man made even the number 8 Espada shiver. Watch your tongue, Xiaolaporo. I spared Yami my wrath because of the boss. Here, you will not receive such mercy. Baragon's anger at Ichigo and Harribel had been stewing for weeks ever since he was forced to retreat. Aizen had only fueled his fire by stating that the intended attack to wipe out Karakura town would not take place until the Hogyoku was fully awakened. While the man hinted that he was plotting something for Ichigo in secret, Baragon would wait no longer. He was going to have his revenge on Harribel and her student, with or without Aizen's permission. Pushing his glasses up, Xiaolaporo stared at his superior. Normally he would not call an Espada's judgment in question since he was almost at the bottom of the totem pole, but he could not sat his curiosity with silence. Lord Aizen was still planning on having Ichigo Kurosaki join our forces. What are you going to say to him once you've killed the boy? That we have one less obstacle in our path to destroying the Soul Society, Baragon simply stated as he stomped forward. And if a supposed ally were to fall to me, wouldn't that mean he wasn't fit to join us? The logic made sense to Xiaolaporo, even if it was just sophism. Well, at the very least it'll give us the chance to see what fruits my experiment will bear. He turned his head and smiled at his experiments behind him. I must say, things turned out better than I expected. Out of the Garganta came Baragon's fractions, Ggio, Findor, Charlotte, Puao, Nerg and Aburama. The 6 Arrancars were no longer wearing their usual uniforms. Instead they wore black versions of their outfits. But that was the tamest bit of their new appearances. Grr, Ggio growled as he looked out onto the town. His face was covered in black and red marks that traveled down. His eyes had no pupils or irises anymore. Instead all he had were white blank orbs in his sockets, though he could still see fine. The other Frashens were in a similar state, covered in black and red markings while growling in a bestial state. Zyalapwaro frowned. I suppose weaker Arankars will not be able to control themselves with all that power surging through them. I'm interested what happens in combat. I care little about what becomes of them, Berrigan callously said, keeping his back to his men. They have no need for their minds. They only need to be unleashed upon my enemies. He finally turned to address his men. The traitor, the Soul Reaper and their spawn are mine. Bring me the heads of their allies. Raahhhhhh. The 6 men roared. Even without their minds, their loyalty to Berrigan was still absolute. The Frashens scattered in different directions, each heading for Ichigo's friends. Berrigan gave his fellow Espada a glance. And what of you? Oh, don't worry, I'm not nearly brave enough to try to stop you. Just be sure to bring me a piece of Ichigo Kurosaki. You will be lucky if there is even a speck of him when I'm finished. Berrigan ignored his companion and stomped away. He didn't want to use Sonito to get to Ichigo's house quickly. He wanted Ichigo to know he was here and that he was coming for him and his family. Watching Berrigan leave, Zyalapwaro smiled. Well, I guess it's time for me gather some more data. He looked back at the Garganta, at the countless eyes that stared back at him from within the void. Well, shall we go and pay our latest guinea pig a visit? Meanwhile, Ichigo and Harribel's training grounds. The Tres Bestia and their protege were in the middle of a 3-on-1 spar when they felt a dark presence in the air. What the hell? Apache yelled, her chakrams in her hands. What is that? Isn't it obvious? Mila Rose spat, incensed by Apache's cluelessness. It's Berrigan. He's back. He must be here to kill Master Harribel and Asahi. Chad, sweating and panting from the training, looked confused as he honed his senses on the intruders. I'm feeling a lot of Ichigo. Sung Sun shared his confusion. He's right. It feels like an army of Ichigo. She could sense Berrigan clearly, but the others. Mila Rose looked up at the sky. I sense 2 strong Arankars heading our way. They'll be here any minute. The lioness Arankar felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Chad. What, Yasutora? We should split up. I'll take one. You 3 take the other, Chad said, looking at his teacher with determination. Apache slapped Chad on the back of his head. Are you brainless? You can't fight them one-on-one. Izans did something to them. We outnumber them 4-2. We should fight together and... Mila Rose put a hand up and stared Chad in the eye. She'd be lying if she said she wasn't concerned for her student, especially after she shared her bed with him several times. But the look in Chad's eyes told him he was determined to prove himself. You're serious? She asked. You could die. I was prepared when I went to help Ichigo in the Soul Society. But I ended up not helping him at all and I went down too easily. Chad put a hand on his chest, to the scar Kiraku gave him. If I can't fight now, then I don't think I'll ever be able to have Ichigo's back again. Let me do this. He looked at the Tres Bestia, his eyes going from Apache to Sung Sun and then to Mila Rose. Let me fight. A tense silence filled the air before the 3 sighed simultaneously. Fine, Apache said. I guess it'll be a good chance to see how much you've improved since we started training you. Oh, are we finally warming up to our student, Apache? Sung Sun teased. While Apache and Sung Sun argued, Mila Rose looked at Chad before giving him a nod. Good luck. She leaned forward and gave the teen a quick kiss, making the strong human blush. Try not to die. Nodding, Chad took off and headed for the other side of the mountain. No sooner did he leave, the 3 felt the 2 presences heading for them split up. Guess Chad's idea of splitting them worked. Good. Now it's 3-on-1. This should be easy. Apache grinned. Boom. A comet fell out of the sky and smashed into the mountain, landing 50 feet away from the 3. As the dust cleared, the Tres Bestia readied themselves as a figure emerged from the crater. Great. Just great, Apache groaned. Of the 6, we get the fruitcake. But Mila Rose and Sung Sun knew something was up immediately as Charlotte Coolhorn stepped into view. His body was covered in red and black markings that ran across the exposed part of his chest and his arms. The three felt a twinge of fear as the effeminate Arrancar looked at them with the eyes of an angry beast. What has Aizen done to him? Why does his spiritual pressure feel so much like Ichigo's? Mila Rose asked. Raahhhhh. Here he comes. Meanwhile, with Chad. Chad heard the loud roar on the other side of the mountain but had to pay it no mind as the other Arrancar that had landed towered over him. He's huge, he thought to himself. It was very rare for Chad to have to look up at anyone. He was puzzled by the red and black markings all over his face but paid it no mind. He figured it was some trick of Aizen's. Huao clenched both his fists and teeth as he stared down at Chad with his blank, white eyes. Grr. Already Chad had his left and right arms transformed. This is it. Moment of truth. Chad knew that Apache was right. The four of them stood a better chance of fighting together rather than Chad fighting one-on-one. But after the defeat at the hands of Kiraku, Chad knew he had to do this. He had to prove he could fight. He failed in the mission to save Rukia just like he failed to protect Ichigo in his fight against Baragan. If he couldn't face the enemy now, he could never raise his fists to help his friends again. Putting up a boxing stance, Chad looked at Huao with the same determined eyes he gave Mila Rose. Bring it. With a bloodthirsty roar, Huao threw a fist brimming with spirit energy. Chad retaliated with a powerful right fist of his own. The two brawlers' attacks met, their fists slamming together and causing the entire mountain to shake from the clash. Meanwhile, Kurosaki House. The three Soul Reapers inside the home all stopped what they were doing when they felt the massive wave of power that had arrived in Karakura town. Toshiro cursed as he leapt off the couch and looked at Rangaku. They're here. Isshin stormed out of the kitchen. I sense it too, and a big one is heading straight here. Isshin scowled. It must be the one who beat Ichigo to a pulp before. Rangaku pulled out her phone and read the message that the Soul Society sent her. Captain. Her eyes widened as she processed the words on the screen. The Soul Society is ordering us to stand down. What? Isshin and Toshiro shouted. It didn't surprise Toshiro but it still disheartened him. The Arrancars must be here for Ichigo, Harribel and their baby. And it looks like the Soul Society has given up the viewpoint of Ichigo being their ally in this fight. Toshiro felt himself torn. On the one hand he knew his duty as a captain and that he was to follow orders. But on the other was Ichigo and his family. Even if he felt that Ichigo's loyalty was questionable, he couldn't just abandon Isshin and his daughters. He knew that he had to fight. I'm going to fight, he told Rangaku. This might be Ichigo's fight but Yuzu and Karen are humans. And it's our job to protect them. The strawberry blonde nodded. I understand, Captain. I'll stay here and guard the girls. I'll go too. Isshin pulled out a glove, the same type of glove Rukia used, and pushed it to his chest, popping out the human shell he'd been staying in all this time. Where's Harribel and Asahi? I've got her, said Harribel as she came down the stairs, a sleeping Asahi in her eyes. So they've come. Harribel looked down at her baby and frowned, torn between going to fight the enemy and staying to protect her daughter. I know I must stay and protect my Asahi but, the new mother sighed. I can't fight Baragan and protect her at the same time. Harribel decided to swallow her pride and do something she never thought she'd do. Walking up to Rangaku, she held out Asahi. Promise me you'll protect her. Rangaku looked at the woman, surprised by this show of faith. Harribel had been cold to both her and Toshiro while they were staying with them. But the look in Harribel's eyes told Rangaku that she trusted her enough to ask for help. She must know how much danger Asahi is in if she's asking us to protect her baby. She held out her hands and accepted Asahi. I swear I won't let anyone touch her. I will hold you to it. Harribel pushed herself out of her Gigai and stood in her Arrancar form. Else you will have me to contend with. She ignored the two male Soul Reapers and headed out the door, eager to confront Baragan before he could reach the house. The Espada didn't make it far before she saw something fly towards her. She drew her sword and readied herself as a figure rocketed towards her. This spiritual pressure, it's just like Ichigo's. Did Lord Aizen do this? No. Harribel shook her head. Xialaporo. I'm certain he had a hand in this. The Arrancar approached Harribel and slammed into the blonde. As the impact sent Harribel skidding backwards, she saw who her attacker was. Ggio Vega. Raaaaaaah. Ggio screamed into her face. Traitor RRRRRR. Black and red energy pulsed from his body and he pushed her away from him. Such a thing would have been hard to fathom. A mere fraction pushing an Espada back was hard to believe. But the Reishi juiced-up Arrancar had grown stronger thanks to the experiment. Still, Harribel stood her ground and gripped her sword. I will cut you down. And then your master will be next. Gra. Meanwhile, with Isshin and Toshiro, high above the Kurosaki house stood the current and former Squad 10 captains. While they waited for their enemies to come, we should split up. Draw them away from the house, Toshiro suggested. Asahi and the girls don't have much spiritual energy and it looks like they're going after all of Ichigo's allies. Am I to assume you're an ally? Isshin asked with an eyebrow raised. Looks like none of the other 3 captains seem willing to lend a hand. Toshiro felt a twinge of shame. I know, I'd have thought that at least Byakuya would stick up for Ichigo. I've known him longer. Trust me, the only stick he has is the one up his ass. All he cares about are orders. Isshin felt 2 strong presences close in on them. We should split them up. Get them away from Rangaku and the girls. Agreed. Toshiro started to take off before he stopped for a moment. And, Captain Shiba. Yes. When Toshiro turned his head, Isshin saw a genuine smile on his face. It's good to fight alongside you again. The feeling is mutual, Captain Hitsugaya. Toshiro darted off immediately, not wanting Isshin to see his face go red from embarrassed pride. Isshin chuckled before taking off in the opposite direction, strengthening his spiritual pressure to lure the Arrancars away from the house. The plan worked and Isshin was satisfied when the attackers split up and one came straight for him. Unfortunately, the massive wave of power told Isshin that whatever Aizen had done to his men, it had powered them up considerably. No sooner did he land in a wide uninhabited construction yard did his attacker come in for the kill. Isshin drew his sword and countered the charge, pushing back his opponent. And who might you be? His opponent, Findor, was not in the mood for talking. Grr. His white mask had a similar red and black pattern that Ichigo's initial mask had, his body burning with power that felt identical to Ichigo's. Power. More power. The insane Arrancar screamed. The hell is up with you? With a feral scream, Findor took the blade on his wrist and smashed it against his mask. With part of his mask destroyed, Findor's power skyrocketed. Power RRRR. Isshin frowned as he prepared himself. Guess I got the craziest one. Meanwhile, with Toshiro was just as pleased to see Isshin to see the Arrancars move away from the Kurosaki house. I hope Rangaku will be okay. He landed in a small grassy field and waited. He stretched out his senses and detected the other 3 captains and their lieutenants all together but not moving. They really have given up on Ichigo. It didn't surprise Toshiro after seeing Ichigo hollow fee into a vasto lord that the Soul Society would decide that they could entrust Ichigo. But after talking with Harribel and spending time with her and Ichigo, Toshiro had come to understand that Ichigo was not a bad person. Even if his judgment was within question, he was merely the victim of circumstance. And despite his reservations about Harribel, he realized as he observed her that she wasn't inherently evil despite being a hollow. I understand the Soul Society's position, but this is wrong. It's wrong to just let Ichigo fight Aizen alone hoping they'll kill each other. I wish the others understood this. The captain had no time to contemplate on the inaction of his fellow captains when the Arrancar who'd been following him smashed into the ground. His spiritual pressure is almost the same as Ichigo's. What in the world has Aizen done to him? Out of the crater jumped out Aburama. The man's tattooed body was now overtaken by a roadmap of black and red markings, his blank eyes staring at Toshiro with such heated bloodlust it reminded the small captain of Kenpachi. Kill you. Killy ukili 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 oh you. Kill. Aburama swung his sword in a downward chop, forcing Toshiro to jump back. So it looks like whatever Aizen did to you robbed you of your sanity. I'm almost sorry to have to kill you. Kill, screamed Aburama as he charged again. But I'm not that sorry. Reign over the frosted heavens, Hirinmaru. Meanwhile, Urahara's shop. Yoruichi opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. Kazuki was already outside ahead of her. Looks like the enemy moved faster than we anticipated, she noted. Indeed, what quick pawns Aizen has. The shop was completely surrounded by a whole horde of Arancars. Yoruichi noted how irregular and misshapen some of them looked. All of them looked bizarre and barely resembled humans. The largest pair in front of them stepped aside as their master approached. Kazuki tipped his hat up to get a better look at the pink-haired bespectacled Arancar, obviously the leader. First meetings usually warrant an introduction, he said with a sly smile. The Arancar gave a quick laugh. How rude of me. Forgive my lack of manners. The Espada gave the shopkeeper a respectable bow. I am Espada number 8. Zyalaporo grants. Standing up straight, Zyalaporo fixed his glasses and smiled. And you are Kazuki Urahara. He glanced at the purple-haired woman behind him. And I assume you must be Yoruichi Shihoin. His lips formed a wide smile. It is quite a pleasure to meet you. Charmed. What are you doing here? Yoruichi bluntly asked. Are you here for Ichigo and Harribel? Not at all. That's Baragon's show. I merely decided to take advantage of a golden opportunity to see my experiments in action. Ah, Kazuki tilted his head back as it became clear. So you're the one who pumped up Baragon's men with Ichigo's spiritual pressure. A clever observation. Your intelligence is to be commended, Zyalaporo praised. But enough about your half-breed ally. I'm here because of you. Oh, and what would you possibly want from a candy store owner? Isn't it obvious? Zyalaporo tapped the side of his head. I'm interested in that big brain of yours. I have dreamed of experimenting on a captain-class Soul Reaper. And who better fitting to be my test subject than the man whose intelligence is supposed to rival both myself and Lord Aizen? He gave Yoruichi another glance. And I can think of a few ways I can experiment on your friend there. At least buy me dinner first, Yoruichi teased as she cracked her knuckles. Wow, Kazuki, looks like you've got an admirer. Yes, but I think Mayuri will get angry if anyone dissects my brain before he gets a crack. Kazuki took a step forward and started to draw his sword from his cane. My apologies, Mr. Grants. But I'm going to have to ask you to get off my property. Oh really? Zyalaporo grinned. Unfortunately for you, I don't need consent when I obtain my test subjects. With a snap of his fingers, all of Zyalaporo's fractions lunged for the pair. Meanwhile, high above Karakura town, Baragon marched along in the sky, his footsteps booming like thunder. He gripped his axe in his right hand so hard his knuckles were turning white. If he wanted to, he could appear at Ichigo's house in less than a few seconds. But he chose not to. He wanted to fan the flame of hatred inside of him with every step so that when he reached his destination, he would unleash all his fury onto the traitor and her student. Sensing someone headed his way, Baragon's march came to a stop. So you've come back to die. In front of him emerged Ichigo, already dressed in his black Benkai jacket and gripping his black blade. Baragon. The Espada and substitute Soul Reaper locked eyes and stared each other down. Baragon's body began to burst with red spirit energy, the sheer power of it astounding Ichigo, who in turn released his own black and red energy. There is no escape, Baragon told his enemy. Harribel will not save you this time. You were but a worm compared to me last time. No matter how stronger a worm gets, it is still a worm. Talk all you want, Ichigo shouted back, unintimidated by the Espada's strong power. I won't let you kill Harribel or Asahi. I will stop you, and then I will stop Aizen. Stop me. Baragon narrowed his eye. You can do nothing. I am a king. I am a god, and you will know this god's wrath. Ichigo blinked and saw Baragon standing right in front of him. The kingly Arancar held his axe over his head. Die, worm. And then Baragon brought the axe down. Chapter 31. Kurosaki House. Rangaku sat on Ichigo's bed. In her crib was little Asahi, sound asleep and oblivious to the peril that threatened her parents. Captain Hitsugaya, Captain Shiba, she mumbled, looking out the window. She was in her Soul Reaper form, her Gigai stuffed into Ichigo's closet along with Toshiro's. The raging spiritual pressures were all over the town. Rangaku was confused why so many of the Arancar felt like Ichigo, unaware of Zyalaporo's experiments. She sensed Ichigo fighting the Espada who'd beaten him before, Kazuki and Yoruichi fighting what felt like another Espada and a whole horde of Arancars, and Isshin, Toshiro, and the rest of Ichigo's friends fighting the Arancars with Ichigo's spirit energy. But then, she felt another one. And it was coming straight for them. Damn it, She looked back at Asahi and cursed. She promised to watch over Asahi for Harribel, but if she let the Arrancar make his way here, then she'd have to battle with Asahi, Yuzu and Karen in the line of fire. She walked over to the baby and put her blanket over her, patting the child's head. "I'll be right back," she promised, putting a barrier over the baby to keep her from harm. Leaping out of Ichigo's window, she darted into the sky and met the Arrancar head-on. "So, you're the last of them?" she asked, drawing Hineka from her sheath. "Thought you could sneak up on us, did you?" The massive nerd looked like he was about to explode. His muscles strained as Ichigo's spirit energy pumped through his veins. He gripped his sword tightly. But because of his oversized hand, his sword looked more like a pocketknife. "Grr, rahhhhhhhh. He screamed at the top of his lungs, his spiritual pressure erupting like a wildfire. "Kill you." As the Arrancar loomed over her, Rangaku put up a stance. "I don't think so." Growl. Hineka. Her sword dissolved into a storm of ash. "I'll take your head off." She sent the ash towards Nerg, intending on taking his head in the first strike. Gra-ah. Rangaku watched in astonishment as Nergi's spiritual pressure batted her ash away. With murder in his eyes, he lunged for the strawberry blonde. Uh-oh. Isshin vs. Findor. The sky rang with clashing steel. Isshin locked blades with his opponent and pushed him back, albeit with great effort. "What has Aizen done to you?" he grunted. Gra-ah. Findor, who had already smashed more than 3/4 of his mask off, continued to scream in angered pain. Every time he broke off part of his mask, the rush of power caused the mind-breaking pain in his brain surge with greater ferocity. Despite being the calmest and level-headed of his master's minions, he was consumed by mindless rage. He pointed his rapier at Isshin, a storm of energy pouring into the tip. Panic swept over Isshin. Even though the construction site was abandoned, a blast like this would have catastrophic results to Karakura town. As fast as he could, the former captain shot into the air, forcing Findor to aim his blast at the sky. The black and red blast lit up the sky above Karakura town. Isshin dodged it by a hair, seething as he felt his shoulder get singed. Flash-stepping behind the power-mad Arrancar, Isshin swung hard. Findor spun around and blocked the strike with the blade attached to his wrist. The pair stared each other down for a moment until Findor brought the blade to his lips and blew. The high-pitched whistle made Isshin flinch. For a moment, he feared that this was some sort of sonic attack that would disrupt his equilibrium. When nothing happened, he looked around and saw Gargantus form around them. The former captain realized that it was the equivalent of a hollow whistle, calling 10 huge hollows to his side. "Looks like this isn't going to be easy." "Fine then." Isshin took another stance. "Burn." Engetsu. Chad vs. Pow. Blood spilled from Chad's lips. He brought his shield arm up to block Pow's next punch. Nigh. The force of the blow caused his knees to buckle, but he remained standing. For now. The human and Arrancar had been trading blows throughout most of the fight. Chad's training with the Trace Bestia came in handy while he handled the massive Arrancar. Pow's body was bruised and battered. So caught up on his power trip, the giant had abandoned defense. He took every hit that Chad threw at him. But the bruiser kept on coming. No matter how many hard-hitting punches or blasts of spirit energy Chad hit him with, Pow refused to go down. And worse, as the battle raged on the mountainside, Chad's endurance was beginning to wane. Despite all his training, he was still only human. He transformed his left arm into its more devilish state and gathered energy. He blocked Pow's next strike with his shield and made his move. Lemuert. Chad's ultimate attack struck dead on. Pow screamed as the deadly energy hit him. A skull pattern dug itself at the fighter's feet. Chad, winded from putting so much power into that blow, took a step back and waited for Pow to fall backwards. To his complete dismay, Pow didn't fall. He staggered, but the monster was still on his feet. How? What has been done to him? Chad knew that this wasn't normal. That blast should have taken down the Arrancar. Gra hhhhh. Screamed the massive Pow, his spiritual pressure surging like a star about to go supernova. The pain in his body only served to drive him further into his berserker rage. His fists glowed with black and red energy. Despite his huge size hindering him throughout most of the fight, Pow's punch moved like lightning, hitting Chad right in the stomach. Gah! Chad raised his arms only for Pow to punch past his guard, this time earning Chad a punch to the face. His brain bouncing in his skull from the harsh recoil, Chad fell to the ground. But Pow wasn't done yet. He wanted Chad dead. He wanted the puny human erased from the earth. Chad was helpless as he took the beating of a lifetime. The mountainside shook from the flurry of earth-shattering punches. With a loud scream, Pow gathered his energy into his right fist, intending to finish off Chad with a Sero punch that would obliterate him. He threw the glowing red fist, only to feel Chad's left hand reach up and grab it. Gra hhhhh. Pow screamed in agony when the white hand crushed his fist. Finally the giant staggered backwards while his opponent staggered to his feet. "I'd hoped not to use this so close to the girls," Chad murmured to himself, taking deep breaths while he collected himself. Pow's momentary distraction gave him the chance for a second wind. The air grew quiet around Chad, his entire body glowing. "But I promised Mila Rose I'd come back alive, so I've no choice." Pow stared at Chad with seething red eyes before his rage momentarily evaporated into confusion. Chad was growing bigger. Though the young man didn't have the chance to tell his friends, his training with the Trace Bestia had produced some quite extreme results. During his spar with Aeon, as he was treated like a ragdoll by the giant monster, Chad came to terms with what his powers were. They weren't like a Soul Reaper or a Quincy's. As Mila Rose put it, Chad's powers were very similar to a Hollow's. So when Aeon was still pounding the snot out of him, Chad discovered that his arms could do something unique, though the strain was unbearable. He figured out that since his powers were hollow-like, he could absorb hollows. And when he used his arms to devour Aeon, he gained something in the process. Chad was now a behemoth that stood over his opponent. The brawler's entire body was covered in pink and black armor. The shield on his left arm had grown just as big, almost as big as his enlarged body, while his left arm had blade-like protrusions along it, his fingers long and protruding like daggers. Most of his face was unobscured, save for a masked fragment on his forehead that looked suspiciously like Mila Rose's crown. Cuerpo del Titan. The now massive Chad balled his right hand, his body heavy with power. "Sorry, I don't think I've trained enough to hold back." "Gra!" screamed Pow, the rage returning to him. He fought back with his remaining hand, but Chad ignored the strike from the monster and hauled back with his right arm. Sensing death staring him in the face, Pow opened his massive maw to unleash a Sero. Graahhh. El Directo. Chad threw his punch. A blast of blue energy surged out and engulfed Pow. For a moment, Chad's strike echoed across town like thunder. And then, all was quiet. The dust cleared, showing that Chad's attack had blasted a chunk of the forest on the mountainside into oblivion. As for Chad's opponent, looking down, all Chad saw that was left of Pow was the Arrancar's feet. The rest of the huge Arrancar had been blasted to oblivion. Tumbling to his knees, Chad let out a pained groan, his transformation ending. The process of turning back to normal was not as painless as Ichigo's hollowification or the Trace Bestia's resurrection. And he hadn't mastered this power yet, and thus the result of his transformation took much of his remaining stamina and energy. "Gah," he grunted, his body shrinking and the armor covering him disappearing. Panting on all fours, Chad took deep breaths. "It felt like I was fighting Ichigo," he said. Falling to the ground, Chad rolled over onto his back to rest and collect his strength for the moment. "I just hope the girls are alright." Trace Bestia vs. Coolhorn. "Nye, you bastard." Apache dangled limply in the bizarre Arrancar's grip. Nearby lay Sung Sun and Mila Rose, broken and bloody. Charlotte Coolhorn clearly had no qualms against crushing his former comrades. His muscles pulsed with energy, every vein in his body bulging while he gripped Apache by the throat. The three had fought hard against the effeminate Frashion, but it was no good. Coolhorn was just too strong for them. "Gah." Apache felt her former comrades squeeze her throat, threatening to suffocate her. As her face started to turn blue, she held up a hand and blasted Coolhorn in the face with a bala. The blue net slipped out of his grasp, landing on the ground with a thud. "How do you like that, you bastard?" His face smoldering, Coolhorn staggered backwards. You ruined my face. You ruined my beauty," he screamed at the top of his lungs. "I'll kill you." Kill you. He pointed a hand at Apache to fire a Sero to blast her to smithereens, only for a massive fist to suddenly punch him in the face. Apache sat up, now about 15 pounds lighter due to lacking one of her arms. When Coolhorn had dropped her, Apache had ripped her arm off and motioned for her friends to do the same. Aeon, she screamed at her pet, the massive creature standing over Charlotte Coolhorn. Kill this asshole. The chimera creature ignored her command, merely turning its head 180 degrees like an owl to stare at its wounded masters. On her feet, Mila Rose looked at her pet curiously. Why's it looking at us like that? Sung Sun stared at their pet. Perhaps it's curious about us. We did take a beating, after all. Hearing Coolhorn recover from the blow, Aeon's head whirled back around. The mountain shuddered from the mighty creature's enraged roar. Charlotte too let out a berserker scream, but it was silenced by the creature's fist. Over and over again Aeon smashed the fruity Arrancar into the ground. The Trace Bestia had to shield their eyes from the dust cloud that their pet kicked up. A high wind picked up, blowing the dust cloud to the side to reveal Aeon standing above a broken, beaten Coolhorn. Apache smirked. Take that, you fruitcake. Huh. The brunette turned her head and noticed that Chad's battle had also come to an end. Looks like Chad's still breathing. What, you think he'd lose after everything we put him through? Mila Rose asked, a little indignant that Chad would lose to one of Barrigan's minions. How about you have some more faith in our... Boom. The three girls snapped forward and gasped when they saw a massive hole in Aeon's chest. What the hell? Apache screamed when another hole blasted into Aeon's stomach. Rahhhhhhhh, screamed an invigorated Coolhorn, rising from the crater with his spiritual pressure bursting forth. Glitter. Reina de Roses. Smoke obscured the Arrancar for a moment, but he wasted no time emerging in his resurrection, only in black clothing. His eyes glowing black and every vein in his body looking like it was about to burst, Coolhorn lunged at the chimera creature, knocking it back with a single punch. Then Apache saw him turn his attention to her. Uh-oh. Kill you. Coolhorn made a heart with his hands and formed an red and black Sero. Dieeeee. Apache. The two other women screamed as their friend was engulfed by the blast. No. Killy OUUU. Charlotte screamed. I'll kill you. Kazuki and Yoruichi versus Zyalaporo. The number 8 Espada's ears perked up. Looks like my experiments are coming along. Though I doubt they'll last much longer. His musings were interrupted when he sidestepped Kazuki's slash, responding with his own blade. Seems you didn't account for how volatile Ichigo's spirit energy is, Kazuki noted as he battled the scientist. Perhaps. Zyalaporo batted away Kazuki's sword. How strange. I thought that you, like me, would not force a direct confrontation. Not a rather scientific approach, you know. True, but since you're like me, I figured you wouldn't be used to fighting a battle with pure force. Kazuki gave a quick glance to his surroundings. Tessai had grabbed Ururu and Jinta and fled for safety. He directed a barrier to keep ordinary people away, but the street was too cramped for a fight between Soul Reaper and Espada. Especially since they weren't the only ones fighting. The two battling scientists jumped back when one of Zyalaporo's Arrancars was thrown in front of them. Hey, watch your aim. Kazuki shouted at Yoruichi, who landed next to him. You almost hit me. Almost, but didn't, Yoruichi grinned, turning her attention to the Arrancars that surrounded them. Kazuki was silent as he noticed Yoruichi's bloody hands. Having trouble. Harribel told us about the Arrancar's Hierro, but Yoruichi winced from the pain in her hands. Punching these guys feels like I'm punching a tractor tire. That would be my doing, Zyalaporo interjected, his two tallest guards standing behind him. I would not send my men against a fearsome woman who fights with her bare hands without some insurance. I strengthened their Hierro to be as tough as an Espada's. Lord Aizen informed me of the Shihoin clan's sacred armor that you possess, but, his smile grew wide, I don't think it'd be prudent of me to give you the time to utilize it. Well, seems like Mr. Aizen's been blabbing. Kazuki turned to his friend. You gonna be okay? Who do you think you're talking to? Yoruichi rushed forward right at the mad scientist. I'll end this quickly. Oh, Zyalaporo snapped his fingers. More of his goons pounced onto Yoruichi. And how can you end me when you can't even reach me? Because this, Shunko. White lightning crackled throughout Yoruichi's body, blowing off the back of her jacket to reveal her bare back. The surge of power knocked back many of the Arankars who jumped into the air to swarm her, leaving her with only the scientist's 2 guards. You're next. Each giant Arankar was dealt a lightning punch, sending them flying. Xyolaporo gasped when Yoruichi appeared in front of his face. What? Aizen didn't tell you about this? She mocked. With all her might she blasted Xyolaporo with her lightning, blasting him into a charred crisp. Exhausted, Yoruichi deactivated her Shunko and turned around. Well, that's that. She glared at the remaining Arankar who shrank back with fear. You can handle the rest. I'll go help Halib. Chomp, chomp. The former captains could only turn and stare in disgusted horror at the sight of the burned Xyolaporo devouring one of his minions, eating its flesh like one would devour a tender steak. Kazuki narrowed his eyes when he saw the man's injuries heal. So, I guess you did more than just toughen up your fractions, You also made them into your emergency rations. An astute observation, if a little crude, Xyolaporo said, wiping the blood from his mouth. He stood up straight, now fully healed. But what scientist would I be if I didn't come prepared? And speaking of prepared, he stared at Yoruichi. I'm going to hypothesize something. The traitor didn't reveal our abilities, did she? She revealed Barragan's, Yoruichi said. She said that most of the Espadas kept their strongest powers to themselves. Ah, the pink-haired man adjusted his glasses. I see, she's not wrong, but perhaps she still wishes to serve Lord Aizen. A little late for that, don't you think? Kazuki pointed out. You guys sent Barragan to kill her twice now. And there's no way Ichigo would ever serve Aizen. Oh, Lord Aizen was not informed about Barragan's little attack here. As for Ichigo Kurosaki, well, Xyolaporo smirked, as if he knew something they didn't. That remains to be seen. But it would not have availed you, even if the traitor did try to inform you about our battle prowess. But since you don't know, I'll give you a demonstration. The man carefully brought the tip of his sword to his lips. Sip. La Lujuriosa. Kazuki didn't have the words to describe Xyolaporo as he underwent his metamorphosis, and for once he didn't want to find them. But after a moment the Espada stood before the pair in his transformed state, his appearance very tentacle-esque. Yoruichi felt a dark sense of foreboding when the man's eyes locked with hers. Shall we continue, my dear? The wing-like tentacles reached for Yoruichi. She moved to jump away from him, only to gasp when one of the smaller of Xyolaporo's minions had crawled towards her and grabbed her ankles, keeping her in place. Damn it! Yoruichi! Kazuki screamed when Yoruichi was engulfed. He rushed forward, only to watch in confusion as they retreated back to the Espada, leaving Yoruichi unharmed. Are you okay? He asked, sinking his sword into the minion's head to force him to let go of her. I'm fine. Should have paid more attention to the small fry. Yoruichi glared at Xyolaporo. What have you done? Oh, just this. Stretching a hand out, Xyolaporo waited as one of the strands on his wings began to engorge like a purple balloon. It suddenly burst to reveal a small Yoruichi doll that landed in his hand. What a beautiful doll you make. He held up the toy for the pair to see. Let me show you what it does. Harribel vs. GGIO. Raw HHHHHHHH. You sure scream a lot. I think I liked you better when you were cowering behind Barragan. Harribel countered Gio's frenzied slashes. The minion glowed with Ichigo's spirit energy while he battled the Espada, keeping her on the defensive. But Harribel had not trained with Ichigo for nothing. No longer handicapped by her pregnancy, the Espada was more than prepared. She slipped through Gio's guard and slashed his chest. Though she wasn't surprised given his condition, it still irked her to see the small man still standing, shrugging off the energy. Ah! Ggio screamed at the top of his lungs, throwing his head back when his spiritual pressure started to burst out of him. The pain was mind-melting. Only his hatred for Harribel and Ichigo, the ones who'd humiliated him and forced him to endure Xyolaporo's experiments, kept him focused on killing the woman in front of him. Harribel glowed yellow as she raised her spiritual pressure in return. His energy is spilling out of his wound while his pressure is growing out of control. Xyolaporo gave them a power-up, but Ichigo is too unique. His spiritual pressure is too volatile for someone as weak as Ggio. The fool won't be able to sustain it much longer before he goes nuclear. All Xialaporo did was turn Berrigan's men into time bombs. The implication that all 6 of Berrigan's fractions could explode in Karakura town was an eerie thought. Why would Lord Aizen allow this? They could seriously damage the spirit enrichment zone he sought to harvest. Even if Berrigan did act without orders, why aren't Tosin or the others trying to stop them? The answer was obvious. This was what Aizen wanted. Fear gripped Harribel. If Aizen was willing to allow this, then it meant that he was about to enact some plan. And it most likely involved her, Ichigo and Asahi. I'm putting an end to this. Then I'm taking Asahi and get her someplace far away. Part of her wanted to help Ichigo, but she had to let her student fight his own battle. Ichigo should be capable enough to battle Berrigan on equal footing now. And even if Berrigan did release his Resurrection, Ichigo had the contingency that the 2 of them came up with. I pity you, Ggio Vega, Harribel said as she pointed her sword down. I pity what Berrigan has done to you. But pity won't stop me from killing you. Hunt. Tiburon. Harribel transformed into her released state and wasted no time going back on the offensive. She darted forward and swatted Ggio away like a fly. The berserker Arrancar flew backwards before regaining his footing. Rahhhhhhh. He held out a hand, forming an orb of energy. Kill-ou. Ggio did exactly what Harribel wanted. Her sword glowed yellow from her focused spirit energy. Goodbye, Ggio. She sonidoed in front of Ggio and blasted him in the face with her empowered sword Sero. Ah! Engulfed by Harribel's Sero, Ggio lost what control he had over his Sero and it burst, throwing the energy right back at him. Harribel watched the smoke clear to find Ggio gone, obliterated by her Sero. Don't worry, Ggio. Your master will be joining you. But first, Harribel sealed her sword and sheathed it. I need to return to Asahi. Paying her disintegrated opponent no mind, she darted back to Ichigo's house. Ichigo vs. Berrigan. Had Ichigo been a second slower, Berrigan would have cleaved him in half with his first move. The huge axe came down with every intent to kill, missing Ichigo only due to his increased speed from his black Bankai. Appearing behind the elderly Espada, though at a safe distance, Ichigo launched his signature move. Getsuga Tensho. HMPH. The kingly Arrancar swung his axe and split Ichigo's attack in 2, the divided slash exploding after passing him. What foolishness! Berrigan began to stomp towards Ichigo, gripping his axe tightly. Go ahead. Use that technique again. Use it until you exhaust yourself. It makes no difference to me. Berrigan's eyes stared intently on Ichigo while he hefted his axe onto his shoulder. Well, won't you attack again? And give you the initiative? I don't think so. Harribel told me all about your aging powers. Ichigo kept his guard up but Berrigan paid it no mind. True, Ichigo had become stronger, no doubt thanks to Harribel. But his power was still nothing to Berrigan. Harribel was beneath me. Even before we ascended to the Arrancar state, she would never dare raise her blade towards me. She was no match for me then. And she is no match for me. What makes you think that you, her student, could possibly best me? Harribel is stronger than you think. Ichigo shouted back in his teacher's defense. I won't let you hurt her, our child or anyone else. Bluster all you want. It doesn't change anything. Tell me. Berrigan pointed at Ichigo's sword. Would you like to know something the boss once told me? His old, withered lips formed a smile. He told me something interesting about Bankai. And that is, when a Soul Reaper's Bankai is destroyed, it can never be fixed. This time, when I get my hands on that sword, I will turn it to dust. And when that happens you will never be able to fight again. You will die like the useless worm that you are. Not if I kill you first. HMPH, what is a worm to a god? Ichigo had enough. He put a hand to his face and prepared himself. And what is a god, to a non-believer? His energy swirled around him while he transformed into the Vasto Lord state, black and yellow eyes glaring at the monstrous man before him. Prepare to die, Berrigan. The masked Soul Reaper swung his blade. For a moment Berrigan felt nothing. Then a jet of crimson launched out of his chest. He put a hand on his chest to find blood. When he looked back up at Ichigo, his red spirit energy burst out of him like an angry volcano. You think pretending to be a hollow changes anything? I am the king of hollows. And you will know your place. He swung his axe at the boy. Ichigo responded in kind with Tensa Zangetsu. The town shuddered from the impact their weapons made. Baragon reached to grab Ichigo's head, only to be met by a clawed hand in front of his face. Take this. Baragon's world turned red when Ichigo shot a Sero in his face at point-blank range. Meanwhile, Ichigo's house. The tremors that went on all around Karakura town woke up Asahi. The baby cried out in terror, wanting her mother and father. Sadly, neither were around to comfort their baby. But somebody else was. Rangaku's barrier was powerful and would have kept anyone from trying to force their way into Ichigo's room. However, what the lieutenant did not know was that it could not stop a Garganta from opening up inside it. A figure in white stepped out of the portal and walked towards the crying infant. Upon seeing the stranger, little Asahi started crying louder. Shish, Sosuke Aizen cooed as he picked up the baby, calming her by rocking Asahi gently in his arms. Don't worry, Asahi, I'm going to take you right to your mother. Chapter 32, Charlotte vs. Trace Bastia, Apache. Mila Rose and Sung Sun screamed as they watched their friend disappear in the blast, the enraged Charlotte Coolhorn disintegrating her into ashes. Grabbing her broadsword, Mila Rose charged at the berserker Arankar in a blind rage. You bastard! Already in her released state, with all her might she brought the broadsword down with a chop. Coolhorn brought up an arm to defend and promptly lost it when the sword sunk into his flesh. But the loss of his left arm didn't deter the bizarre creature from holding up a hand in front of Mila Rose's face, a Sero forming to blow her head off. Mila Rose! Sung Sun screamed, rushing to try to save her friend before she was decapitated. A fist came out of nowhere and smashed into the side of Coolhorn's face. Once again the berserker Arankar was knocked to the ground. Mila Rose and Sung Sun turned and were relieved to see Chad. But even more so the sight of Apache alive behind him, having been protected by him. You're alive, Mila Rose cried, relief swelling over her. We were worried. Chad gave his mentors a thumbs up. Sorry I'm late, I had to wait a bit to recover before I could move, he confessed. Don't do that, you look like such a dweeb, Apache groaned as she struggled to her feet. Thanks for the save though. Sung Sun joined them. They watched Coolhorn make it to his feet, but as the effeminate Arankar started to stagger and sway, her eyes were directed to his stump of an arm. Spirit energy was pouring out of the wound, its signature volatile and dangerous. Not good. Her brow furrowed when she saw Coolhorn's blank expression. He's a walking bomb. Losing his arm made his spirit energy unstable. He's gonna blow. Indeed, Coolhorn was screaming in agony. His veins bulged and cracks formed in his skin. Black and red spirit energy began pouring out of the wounds. Ichigo's spirit energy was too much for Coolhorn's body to handle, and now it had reached critical mass. Gra hhhhhhhh. Coolhorn screamed as his body began to swell up. Chad immediately put himself back in front of the Trace Bastia and put up his shield arm. Get behind me. Are you nuts? Mila Rose screamed. Your shield won't do anything. He's going to take the entire mountain with him. We have to run. It's too late, Apache shouted, sensing that the walking bomb was going to explode any second. A large shadow suddenly loomed over the four. All eyes turned to Aeon as it loomed over Coolhorn. The Trace Bastia saw that his wounds had regenerated. Aeon, what are you doing? The massive creature didn't say a word. It merely grabbed Coolhorn with its huge hands and picked the Arankar up. It turned its head towards Chad, staring deep within the human from those endless black pits for eyes. Chad was confused when he heard a low grunting sound come from the chimera creature. It sounded low and sad to the young man. But Chad somehow understood what Aeon was saying. Take care of them, Aeon. The Trace Bastia all screamed when Aeon jumped high into the air. Aeon jumped as high as its massive strength could take it. The moment Aeon's jump reached its peak was when the bomb that had been Charlotte Coolhorn exploded. A massive burst of red and black energy released all at once. The four on the mountainside braced as the shockwave almost knocked them off their feet. When they looked back up, they saw a huge cloud of smoke above the mountain. Coolhorn was dead and he'd taken Aeon with him. Wow, Mila Rose breathed in terrified awe. If Aeon hadn't grabbed him and jumped, he would have turned the mountain into a crater. Apache bristled. What did Aizen do to him? He was a monster. Sung Sun turned to Chad. I suppose we should all be lucky that you finished your opponent before he went nuclear. Otherwise Apache would have been blasted to Kingdom Come if you hadn't saved her in time. Hey, I could have saved myself, Apache insisted. You mean before or after we vacuumed up your ashes? While Apache bickered with Sung Sun, Chad walked away and looked out on the town. His first inclination was to rush to Ichigo's aid. The battle between him and Barragan was raging. But Chad knew that if he tried to intervene he'd only get in the way. As much as it pained him to admit, this was Ichigo's fight and Ichigo's alone. Meanwhile, Isshin vs. Findor. The sky was littered with explosions as fire and water met with disastrous results. Isshin had to admit as continued to combat the Arrancar, this was a rather formidable opponent. He could tell what Aizen had done to him, pumping him full of his son's spirit energy in order to increase his power. And with him continuously breaking off pieces of his mask, Findor's power kept rising higher and higher. And with the release of his Resurrection, Pinza Aguda, Findor was able to counter Isshin's Zanpakuto fire with high-pressure blasts of water. Blood dripped from a light wound on Isshin's left shoulder. Dealing with Findor's hollows had been an easy task once Isshin released Shikai. But when Findor had directly engaged him he'd been forced to take the fight to the air after seeing how destructive the Arrancar had become. Findor seethed with anger as he continued to charge at Isshin with his huge claw. The only rational thought in his mind was to serve his king. And killing this Soul Reaper would fulfill that desire, even as his body started to crack. Isshin's ears picked up the massive kaboom on the mountain behind him and quickly realized by Findor's unstable energy that the man was close to exploding too. And if he detonated right in the middle of town, if even one of these guys goes boom, the town will end up as a giant crater. What is Aizen thinking sending these guys here? Though he wanted Karakura town, why would he risk destroying it in the spirit enrichment zone just to test his men? Unless, Isshin started to analyze the situation more. Unless this isn't Aizen's show. Barragan must have acted without Aizen's orders. That makes sense. Still, what is Aizen thinking, letting one of his top men risk his plans like this? Findor's pained scream snapped him out of his thinking. He saw Findor hold out his huge claw and open it up, a massive red and black sarrow forming. Shit, can't dodge or he'll hit the town. He dipped his fingers into the wound on his shoulder and threw the blood onto his sword. The reishi fire intensified to intense levels before Isshin gathered his energy. Gotta take him down, before he takes everyone with him. He held the sword overhead and swung with all his might. Getsuga Tensho. The sarrow forming in Findor's claw fired too late to save the Arrancar from death. The massive burning Getsuga Tensho squashed his attack before Findor himself was caught in the blast. His death rattle echoed throughout the town as he was blasted to ashes. Panting, Isshin sheathed his sword and watched the smoke settle to reveal Findor gone, nothing but a pile of falling ashes in his wake. Woo, he breathed, wiping the sweat from his brow. Good thing I finished it before he exploded. Otherwise the blast would have reached Yuzu, Karen, Asahi and Isshin's eyes suddenly widened when he saw something in the distance. Rangaku. His former lieutenant was currently in the grip of the now transformed Nerd, the Arrancar now the side of a house. The roof of the abandoned factory they'd been fighting in had collapsed from their battle, revealing her dire situation to her former captain. She'd been able to lure Nerd away from the Kurosaki house but had been thoroughly crushed by her opponent. Nerji's huge body crackled with red lighting, his green fur smoldering from the heat of his body from the energy running through him. Rangaku screamed as the mammoth Arrancar squeezed, feeling her ribs on the verge of cracking. Nerd took pleasure in Rangaku's screams, planning on making Rangaku's death a slow and painful one. Armed with only the broken hilt of Heineka, Rangaku struggled to break free of the Arrancar's grip. Hado ga, she screamed when Nerd squeezed again. Nerd grinned with malicious glee. There was no doubt in his rage-filled mind that he'd won this fight. First he would kill Rangaku, then kill the child that he'd been originally aiming for. He prepared to give Rangaku one final squeeze to completely crush her bones and organs. Die. Let her go, you son of a bitch. A wave of blue energy surged towards them. Nerd was so drunk off his fury that he didn't realize that he'd been attacked until Rangaku fell from his grip. Looking down he saw two large stumps where his arms used to be. Gra! The mammoth Arrancar screamed as the pain suddenly hit. Blood gushed from his stumps while he staggered backwards. Rangaku opened her eyes to find herself in the arms of Isshin. "See Captain Shiba," she coughed. "Don't speak. Your whole ribcage is fractured and is close to puncturing your lungs," Isshin warned. How? I'm a doctor, remember?" Isshin smiled. He turned his head towards Nerg and was horrified by what he was seeing. Black and red spirit energy started to pour out of the huge Arrancar's wounds. "Ah!" Nerg screamed in agony. Like Coolhorn and Findor, the unstable spirit energy inside him reached critical mass when he sustained a heavy injury. The cracking of Nergi's skin and his rising spirit energy warned Isshin what was about to happen. Damn it, he's about to blow too. He knew there was no time to charge up another Getsuga Tensho. All Isshin could do was hope that his next gambit worked. He spun his sword around and muttered a spell. Hado number 58, Tenrin. The tornado that blasted out of Isshin's Angetsu swept up the Arrancar and hurled him into the sky. Nerg screamed incoherently until his body could contain the power inside him no more, erupting with a massive blast. The former captain quickly took Rangaku into his arms and shielded her from the shockwave, holding her close until the dust settled. He looked up to find yet another cloud of smoke hanging over Karakura town. Nerg was dead now too. Hearing a groan of pain beneath him brought Isshin back into focus. Rangaku. He saw his former lieutenant struggling to breath and knew that the internal damage was worse than he first assessed. Hang on. He put a hand to her ribs and started to use Kaido. Although healing wasn't his forte, he'd taught himself to properly heal after Masaki died so that he wasn't powerless to save his children. He could feel the others fighting in the distance. His senses picked up Yoruichi's spiritual pressure faltering and had to fight the urge to run to her and Kazuki's aid. Rangaku was his top priority. "Ichigo," he muttered as he felt his son fighting Baragon. "Please come back to us alive." Toshiro vs. Aburama. Kill Youuuuuuuuuuu. Devorar Pluma. The avian Arrancar roared as he launched his feather attacks at the captain again and again. In a blind rage he unleashed a storm of feathers at the pillar of ice that Toshiro used to shield himself. "I'll kill you." Toshiro braced himself with more ice. This was becoming more problematic. Aburama was becoming more and more indiscriminate with his attacks. If Toshiro wasn't careful then the Arrancar would end up causing havoc in the town below. "I should hurry. Ryu." "No need, Captain Hitsugaya." From behind his ice, Toshiro was shocked to see a small figure behind the erratic eagle. Aburama sensed the intruder and spun around to find nothing. However, after a brief moment, a butterfly mark appeared at the center of the man's chest. The same voice next came from Aburama's back. "Nijeki Kesatsu." Soi Fan calmly walked away from the eagle. Aburama screamed as he felt the poison take his body, disappearing in a giant butterfly mark that slowly faded away. Toshiro was surprised to see his comrade. Soon Captain Kuchiki and Unohana joined them along with their respective lieutenants. The ice around Toshiro dissolved while he sealed his bankai away. "I didn't think you'd come." Soi Fan slid her hands into the folds of her sleeves while looking at Toshiro disapprovingly. "You showed too much restraint," she chastised. "Had that fight gone any longer he would have exploded and taken you and half the town with him." She gestured to the nearby clouds of black and red smoke made by the other exploding Arrancar. "Why are you all here?" Toshiro demanded to know. "I thought you were ordered to stand down." "Yes, and those orders were given to you as well," Byakuya warned, his face stern and harsh. "Yet you disobeyed a direct order from the head captain and joined the battle anyway." Sheathing his sword, Toshiro crossed his arms and glared back at the three captains. "Am I supposed to do nothing as a horde of Arrancars rampage through the town we were sent here to protect?" Soi Fan narrowed her eyes. "Don't try to twist things around. We were not sent here to protect Karakura town. We are here to monitor Ichigo Kurosaki and his allies in order to decide whether to kill them." The harshness of Soi Fan's tone chilled Toshiro, even if he knew she was right. Byakuya was the next to speak. "I understand that you might feel an emotional attachment to Ichigo since he is the son of your former captain. But that doesn't change the situation." Byakuya narrowed his eyes. "You are aware that the head captain has already made his decision towards Ichigo. And you know that I do not approve of it." Toshiro shouted back heatedly. You know Ichigo just as well as I do, Byakuya. You know that he isn't evil. He is not our enemy. Renji stood behind the group and bristled with fury at the decision made by their head captain. But he knew better than to voice his outrage at his captain. Likewise Azane stood next to him feeling distraught about the whole situation. Only Omeda seemed to be okay with the decision made. Hana, however, spoke with her usual calm. You are right, Captain Hitsugaya. Ichigo Kurosaki is not evil. However, when someone with heart and ideals goes astray, good becomes something far worse than evil. Right now Ichigo is teetering on the edge of that line. And if he falls into darkness he will become a threat to everyone. His romance with Tear Harribel and his subsequent hollowification have turned him into something far less than a human. I understand that and, Hana continued, cutting him off, he is emotionally vulnerable to Aizen's influence. He couldn't even give you an answer when you questioned his loyalty. If it were up to us, Captain, we would remove his powers and let him live out his life as a normal human again. But Captain Kuchiki already tried to remove his powers once, said Soi Fan, watching Ichigo fighting Baragon from a distance. And you saw the result of what became of that thanks to Kazuki Urahara's meddling. And because we have no way of separating him from his hollow powers we cannot do the humane thing. And what about Ichigo's friends? Demanded Toshiro. They've done nothing wrong. Isshin has much to answer for, Byakuya interrupted. Orihime Inoue is blameless in all of this so she will be spared. And the Quincy lost his powers when he fought Captain Kuritsuchi so there is no need to punish him. But Yasutora is just as much of hollow hybrid as Ichigo. He has the capacity to become just as dangerous as Ichigo. And as for Harribel and her subordinates, our duty as Soul Reapers is clear. And the child, Isshin confirmed that Asahi is human. He lied, Soi Fan bluntly said. He would do anything to protect his granddaughter. He knew you would take his word at first glance. That's why he didn't show you her chain of fate. We have no doubt that the thing that creature birthed is a hollow wearing a human shell. Toshiro clenched his teeth. That's not true. Captain Shiba would never lie to me. And yet despite thinking that, Toshiro felt doubt creeping into the back of his mind. Would he? Byakuya took a deep breath and sighed. Captain Hitsugaya. I do not approve of this either. I too spoke out against the order but head Captain Yamamoto's orders are absolute. And even if my heart tries to tell me otherwise, my eyes cannot deceive me. He turned to the battle in the far distance between Ichigo and Baragon. Can you look at that battle and tell me that is a fight between a Soul Reaper and a Hollow? The young captain's silence was answer enough. That feels like a fight between two Vasto Lord Hollows. If we allow Ichigo to grow further in strength, he could become something more dangerous than Aizen. Hana put a hand on Toshiro's shoulder. And there's still Harribel to consider. We've no idea what her motives are in all of this. For all we know she could be using Ichigo as a way to supplant Aizen. The debate is over, Captain Hitsugaya, Soi Fan said, ending the discussion with a tone of finality in her voice. Our orders are clear. Once Aizen has been dealt with, Ichigo Kurosaki is to die. Silence filled the air as Toshiro hung his head. Yet while the four captains debated the ethics of their orders, Azane's phone started to ring. Hello. Yes, the captains are here. What? She screamed. Hana spun around. Azane, what's the matter? Her alarm grew when her lieutenant turned to her with a pale face. See Captain, Azane trembled from the report she just received from the Soul Society. It's him. He's here. Kazuki and Yoruichi versus Zyalaporo. Ahahahaha. Nai, groaned a downed Yoruichi, unable to stand anymore. Anyone ever tell you that? Your laugh is annoying. The Flash Goddess had been soundly crushed once the Espada used the doll he'd created of Yoruichi and crushed both her Achilles tendons. Now, I could have done a lot worse, Zyalaporo threatened, holding up the tiny Yoruichi doll in his hand. But I would like to have my specimens in one piece. I just think it's funny that the woman who was known as the fastest in all the Soul Society can no longer even stand up. Kazuki leapt to his friend's defense. Give me that doll. His sword flashed with a crimson red. Scream Benihime. His red attack launched at the pink-haired man but one of his gargantuan subordinates jumped in front and took the hit instead. He saw the purple tentacle wings reach towards him but threw up a barrier of his own to protect himself from the same fate as Yoruichi. He landed on the roof of his shop and studied the surroundings a bit. Aside from their battle and Ichigo's, it looked like the rest of Baragon's men had all been defeated. Zyalapuro seemed to have noticed it as well thanks to the huge clouds of red and black smoke that hung over the town. So it seems that my experiment was a failure. But then again, how could a mere fraction hope to contain such volatile spirit energy? The scientist stroked his chin. Still, their increase in power was considerable. This has given me much useful data. Imagine the power boost an Espada would gain. Yes, Zyalapuro's smile widened. I'm certain that the Espada would be strong enough to integrate Ichigo's spirit energy. Yeah, how about no, Kazuki warned. He raised his sword to strike again when he saw Zyalapuro turn and walk away. Leaving so soon? Of course, this little excursion seems to have run its course. I'm disappointed that I wasn't able to acquire you for my experiments, but I'll deign to wait for another opportune moment. In the meantime, his evil eyes turned towards the fallen Yoruichi. I'll settle for your friend. Yoruichi. Kazuki realized Zyalapuro's aim and jumped towards his best friend. But the Espada's minions beat him to her. Get off of me, Yoruichi screamed as she was swarmed by 5 of the white monsters. I can still punch your faces off you. She was silenced when the 5 dogpiled her. Just as Kazuki was about to reach her, the Frashon suddenly glowed with a pink light and a burst of energy surged from the group, knocking Kazuki backwards. When the glow faded, Kazuki looked on in horror at what had become of Yoruichi. In place of where his friend lay was a large stone cube that had been made from the petrified bodies of Zyalapuro's men. And amidst the tangle of stony limbs was the petrified face of Yoruichi. Quite an effective way of capturing prey, wouldn't you say? Mocked Zyalapuro. In his hand the Yoruichi doll turned to stone as well. Oh ho! He watched Kazuki turn to him with murder in his eyes. You're more sentimental than I was led to believe. Are you sure you're a scientist? Oh, I'm peachy, Kazuki seethed. I'll find a way to get her out of that. But first, he pointed Benihime at the man. I'll deal with you first. Ichigo versus Baragon. Sword met axe in a violent struggle. Ichigo clenched his teeth behind his horned mask while he battled Baragon. He could now keep up with the number 2 Espada with his hollowification, but the kingly Arrancar was as strong as ever. Baragon held out a hand and fired a Sero which Ichigo dodged. When Ichigo fired off one of his own, the Arrancar cut it in half with his axe. Before Baragon had the chance to counterattack, Ichigo was upon him again, leading into another clash of steel. The king and the substitute clashed before they were knocked back by the recoil of their exchange. Baragon growled, glaring at the transformed boy with such hatred in his eyes. You're stronger than before, but disguising yourself as a hollow will not save you from me. You will die, and then I will dump your broken, lifeless body in front of that traitor and watch her weep from her foolishness. Why do you hate Harribel so much? What has she ever done to you? Ichigo demanded to know. She defied me once when we were both still just hollows. That alone warrants death. You're petty for a king. I am no mere king, boy. Baragon pointed his axe at Ichigo. I am the king of hollows. Ichigo rolled his eyes. Baragon sure liked to talk grandly about himself. And yet you serve Aizen. Some king you are. Baragon sonitoed right in front of Ichigo. The boy barely had enough time to block the axe as it came down on him. Your disrespect only digs your grave faster. I will kill Sosuke Aizen. And I'll do it with my own hands. Ichigo grunted from the heavy weight of Baragon's axe. He sits upon my throne. The throne that was stolen from me. And I will take back my throne and paint the walls of my palace with his blood. But before I kill him with the very power he gave me, I will kill you. Ichigo's hollow-feed body pulsed with red and black energy. Getsuga, Tensho. Sweeping aside Baragon's axe, Ichigo's black blade launched its signature technique right at Baragon's chest at point-blank range. Baragon staggered backwards with a cry of pain, but Ichigo was disheartened to see that the wound inflicted wasn't deep enough. How? That was a hollow-feed Getsuga Tensho. I am not some pitiful hollow that can be killed with a single swing, boy, Baragon seethed. Nor am I some paltry Arrancar. Even your master fears me. And now, I will show you why. He held out his axe and pointed it downward. I will destroy you and everything you ever held dear. Rot. Arrogante. Chapter 33, Ichigo vs. Baragon. Rot. Arrogante. With the release of his Zanpakuto, Baragon's double-edged axe spewed forth black and purple flames that consumed its wielder. From behind his horned mask, Ichigo watched with chills running down his spine as the flames ate away the flesh of the King of Hollows. When Baragon finally emerged from the dark flames, Ichigo couldn't fight back the slight trembling in his hands. Unlike his subordinates or Harribel, Baragon's transformation was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Instead of turning into a hybrid creature or a wardrobe change, Baragon had stripped away all of his flesh, becoming a skeleton robed with black robes. Glittering in the sun was a crown that sat atop the Espada's bony head. Baragon now looked like an elder lich. "You are trembling," said the voice of Baragon through his skull, noting Ichigo's fear. "Good. You show fear before your betters. A pity your piety will not save you from my wrath." The dark shadow approached Ichigo slowly. As he neared a rooftop water tower, the structure rusted instantaneously and collapsed onto the street below, much to the shock and horror of the confused townspeople. "What are you doing?" Ichigo yelled. "Did you not hear me during the first time I crushed you? My power is senescence. All things wither and rot. When I am done with you, Ichigo Kurosaki, there will be naught but bones left of you. Allow me to give you a demonstration of my power." Baragon held up a hand and pointed a bony finger at a crowd of people below who'd gathered around the destroyed water tower. Respira. Ichigo was powerless as a black cloud shot out of Baragon's form. "No," he screamed in vain, unable to do anything to stop him. Harribel had warned him about Baragon's Respira and there was nothing he could do to prevent what was about to happen. Death came with no mercy for the poor townsfolk. The black cloud descended upon them. Most of the men, women and children didn't even have time to scream as their flesh was burned away. Ichigo watched in horror as the black plague spread throughout the crowd. Though they couldn't see Baragon's deadly smog, those who saw their neighbors turn to bone and ash ran for their lives but were not able to outrun the invisible death. Terror gripped Ichigo as he saw a woman with her child flee, only to get caught by the wave and die together, the little baby nothing but a skeleton in her stroller. "Stoop!" Ichigo screamed at the top of his lungs. He poured every ounce of energy into Tensa Zangetsu. Getsuga Tenshu 00000. The blade beam that Ichigo launched was the most powerful he'd ever made. It streaked across the sky towards Baragon. The lich-like Espada held up a hand and released his Respira again. Ichigo watched in pure horror as his strongest attack withered away as it touched the black smog. The Getsuga Tensho fizzled out just before it even reached Baragon. "How?" he choked. Harribel had warned him about Baragon's aging abilities but this baffled him. That was made of pure spirit energy. "Tell me, Ichigo Kurosaki, did you not think that such energy does not age as well?" Taunted Baragon. "Spirit energy is a product of the heart. So long as the heart beats, energy can be produced. And if the heart can grow old and expire, then so goes the energy it creates." "Well," Baragon tilted his head while staring at the hollow-feed Ichigo with his empty eye sockets. "Am I to assume that was your best?" "Ha ha ha." The bony Espada broke out in evil laughter. "What a pathetic sight. Ah ha 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 ha. To train so hard and yet still be powerless. What a foolish pair you and that traitor make. Ah ha 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 ha." Baragon calmed down and stretched out his hand. From his being a wicked black double-bladed axe appeared and rested into his ivory grip. "Gran Kata, this will be the weapon I will use to kill your master once and for all." I just remembered something that Aizen once told me. You consider yourself a protector, do you not? So tell me, is this town supposed to be under your protection?" Baragon didn't wait for Ichigo to answer. "Then try to protect it from me." The evil king hurled his Gran Kata at a nearby building. Ichigo's eyes widened in horror as the blade cut the building in half. The top half, with everything and everyone still inside, rotted away into dust and bones. "Enough. They have nothing to do with this." Ichigo gathered his strength again and hurled his Getsuga Tensho at him. When Baragon attempted to use Respira, Ichigo layered the strike with another one. "Leave my home alone." This time Ichigo's attack came closer to Baragon. But the kingly lich recalled his axe to him and cut Ichigo's weakened energy to dust. "You have incurred my wrath, Ichigo Kurosaki. And it is my will that everything you know and love be destroyed by my hands. But what about Aizen? He means nothing to me. Baragon's mouth opened to let out a scream filled with murderous anger. I care not for any world he means to create. He robbed me of my throne and my kingdom. So I shall in turn rob him of his plans by destroying Karakura town. Then I will kill him with the very power he sought to give me. Now watch as I turn this city into dust. Not since the death of his mother had Ichigo felt so helpless. With his Grand Kata and Respira, Baragon attacked the nearby buildings and innocent bystanders. Ichigo tried in vain to halt the monster, but this was an adversary he'd never faced before. He tried with Getsuga Tenshos and Seros to stop Baragon's rampage, but the king's power of senescence quashed his attempts. And he dared not try to engage him physically, otherwise both his Bankai and his body would have been destroyed by the evil power. Eventually the nearby area below the two had been reduced to nothing but dust and bones. You monster. Yes, and you are the one who angered this monster. Baragon decided he was done gloating and that it was time to finish this. You can chew on your own stupidity in hell, boy. I'm going to use my Respira and turn you to dust. And you will not die alone. Tell me, would you care to guess what's directly behind you? Ichigo's blood ran cold. He knew exactly what was behind him in the distance, the Kurosaki clinic. No, Asahi, Yuzu, Karen. Once again the king's mirthless laughter filled the air. Yes, ahahaha, you will all die as a family. Consider it my gift for amusing me so far. But this is the end, Ichigo Kurosaki. Though you will die swiftly, Cheer Harribel's suffering will not be so quick and painless. Now, perish. From Baragon's whole being came forth his black plague. Ichigo braced himself as the smog closed in on him. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, when Baragon would turn his Respira onto him. Ichigo had no attack that could block it, and Harribel made it clear his instant regeneration would not rescue him from it. There was nothing he could learn from a hollow that would save him. But Ichigo was the son of a soul reaper. And Isshin had taught his son a few things too. It is over. Baragon watched with glee as Ichigo disappeared in the black mist. What a waste. For all his bluster he could not even touch me. HMPH. What a fool. Huh. The Skeleton King cocked his head slightly when he failed to see Ichigo's rotted skeleton fall from the sky. He didn't even see dust. What the? Baragon paused when he saw a white opening in front of Ichigo. What is that? Ichigo's answer didn't come from behind the portal. It came from behind Baragon. A Senkaimon. My dad taught me how to open one. And guess what else Harribel taught me? The Espada whirled around. Ichigo had gotten as close as he could without being affected by Baragon's senescence. Between his horns was a Sero, but not just any Sero. The king gasped when he saw Ichigo's claws were bloody, meaning only one thing. This is for all the people you killed. Ichigo roared as he unleashed the purple Sero he'd created. Gran Rey Sero. This time Ichigo landed a direct hit. Baragon moved to use Respira but was too late before he was caught in the blast. Ichigo's most powerful attack sent him flying backwards, right into the still open Senkaimon portal. Baragon screamed as he landed on the other side of the gate. He looked up and found himself in a place he was unfamiliar with. What is this? Where am I? Answer me, boy. That's the Precipice World, explained Ichigo. It's the world between this one and the Soul Society. Again, Baragon started to laugh at Ichigo's efforts. So you intend to trap me here? Ha 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 ha. You are a fool. Did you not know that an Arrancar can open a Garganta anywhere? You cannot hold me here, Ichigo Kurosaki. This is merely a bid to buy time. Yeah, Harribel said that you guys can use the Garganta even in the Precipice World, but, Ichigo pointed a clawed finger forward. You should really pay more attention to what's going on. Do you know what day it is? Baragon turned around and saw a massive being rushing towards him like a freight train. What is this? Some sort of trick? It's cleaning day. Baragon unleashed the full power of Respira at the cleaner. But it did nothing but barrel through the miasma. What? Impossible. My powers age all. The Precipice World exists outside of time. Dad told me that the cleaner is something that isn't affected by soul reapers. I figured what's good for the goose is good for the gander. As the cleaner approached, Baragon put up his hands defensively as the cleaner slammed into him. He unleashed the full might of his spirit pressure in order to avoid being sucked into the cleaner. Erg. Berrigan continued to grapple with the cleaner, hearing the door behind him start to close. Do not think this will hold me forever. You will never be safe from me. I am a king, a god. I will haunt you forever. Ichigo Kurosaki I. The door closed and faded, sealing Berrigan inside the precipice world. Ichigo reverted from his hollow-feed form and sealed his Bankai, exhausted from the ordeal. He looked at the carnage down below and had to fight back tears from the destruction he'd been unable to stop. But it's over now, he breathed before his senses picked up something. Where's Harribel going? Curious, he flash-stepped away and headed for his mentor girlfriend. Meanwhile, Kazuki vs. Zayalaporo. Kazuki took a quick look at the stone cube that imprisoned Yoruichi. His heart pounded away as he tried to analyze the cube. He must have modified his soldiers to petrify. I can't sense Yoruichi's spiritual pressure. Is she dead? Is she in stasis? The more he thought about it, the more he grew more worried for his friend's well-being. Worried about your friend? Mocked Zayalaporo. No need to fret, she's still very much alive. But she won't be going anywhere until I release her. In that case, Kazuki lunged forward with his sword. I'll analyze it later to free her. Now that I know she's safe, I can deal with you. Zayalaporo jumped away from Kazuki's slash. He retaliated by ejecting black ink from his body. Kazuki was unable to dodge the droplets and he found himself surrounded by a horde of Kazuki doppelgangers. Cloning. You're just full of surprises. Aren't I? Zayalaporo opened his mouth to speak but was silent when he sensed the battle with Ichigo and Berrigan come to a swift end. What? The pink-haired man's eyes widened with shock. Berrigan was defeated. That would be Ichigo. The fact that I can still feel his energy means his plan worked. I must admit, he's smarter than anyone ever gives him credit for. He opened a Senkaimon and trapped Berrigan in the precipice world right as the cleaner was coming by. Yes, Zayalaporo stroked his chin. I suppose that would be a plan that had a high chance of success. Even Lord Aizen warned us against the cleaner. Strange. The reports we were given suggest that Ichigo Kurosaki was a simple boy who relied on brute force. For him to concoct a plan such as that requires a level of intelligence I didn't think he possessed. The man's eyes turned back to Kazuki and he smiled wickedly. Oh dear, it looks like I'm the last man standing. I suppose we must part for now. Leaving already? We were just getting to the good part. Yes. The Espada let out a regretful sigh. I suppose it can't be helped. Such a shame. I had such designs for you. Ah well. Staring past Kazuki, Zayalaporo's eyes narrowed. I'll settle for a consolation prize. Kazuki realized too late what the man planned. Twin beams of light shot out of the sky and encircled both the Espada and the stone-bound Yoruichi. No, Kazuki shouted as he watched the petrified flash goddess start to rise in the air. Yet he knew that there was no use in trying to break the negation. Zayalaporo and his prize rose up into the air until he reached the garganta that opened up in the sky. Kazuki saw an Arrancar he didn't recognize at the front of the maw. Was your experiment a success, Zayalaporo? I received adequate results, Ulquiorra, replied Zayalaporo. Several of his surviving Frashon appeared to take possession of the stone cube. I'm certain Lord Aizen will forgive my little excursion once I've shown him the results. The stoic Espada, Ulquiorra, looked at the stone cube and the woman imprisoned within. What is this? A door prize, of sorts, Zayalaporo merely remarked while he returned to his sealed state. But we lost Berrigan. If the loss of the number 2 Espada hurt Ulquiorra, the man didn't show it. His loss was deemed inconsequential. His rebellion has shown that he was never devoted to Lord Aizen. It matters not. Lord Aizen has already determined his successor. Kazuki overheard the man and the fear in his mind crept deeper into his heart. So I was right. He planned this, didn't he? Zayalaporo looked down at the scientist and smiled wickedly again. I think you've far worse things to consider, Kazuki Urahara. For if you have half the intellect you're praised for, then you must also know what comes next. Don't worry, I'll take good care of your friend. I'll be back for you shortly when we destroy Karakura town. The garganta closed, and with it, Kazuki lost his best friend. But he had other things to worry about. He had already analyzed the Garganta thanks to Harribel and could go after them to rescue Yoruichi. But first there was the matter at hand. If Zialapura was hinting what Kazuki thought he was, then the one in immediate danger was Ichigo, Harribel and Asahi. Meanwhile, Harribel raced back home as fast as she could so she could safeguard her daughter. She ignored the various explosions around the town, knowing that Berrigan's men had paid the price for the Espada's ambition. "Hang on, Asahi, I'm coming." But she saw a figure approach her when she was halfway there. Harribel blinked when she saw who it was. Ichigo. "Thank goodness, you're all right, Harribel." Ichigo smiled. He'd sheathed Zangetsu and had little Asahi in his arms. The two quickly made their way to a grassy hill below in the middle of a park. "What are you doing with Asahi?" "I trapped Berrigan in the precipice world and raced back home. Asahi was crying and I couldn't get her to calm down. That Arankar Rangaku was fighting broke through her barrier so I grabbed her before anyone else could show up. Figured you'd be able to calm down but she fell right to sleep as soon as I saw you." "Perhaps she sensed that she was safest with you," Harribel noted. "You trapped Berrigan. Impressive. I knew that was the only plan we could come up with but I didn't think it'd actually work." Ichigo's happy smile reassured her. "It got dicey there for a minute but I pulled it off. He's cleaner food now." "Is he though?" Harribel thought about it and she couldn't shake this sense of foreboding. "I suppose we won't know until the Soul Reapers do a thorough inspection." Ichigo held out the sleeping baby. "Here, take Asahi. I'm going to go get Kazuki a hand. I'm worried about him. I can't sense Yoruichi's spiritual pressure. I don't think she's dead but." Harribel nodded. "I understand. Give me Asahi and I'll take her to safety." She sheathed her sword and held out her arms to take her daughter. Shunk. Goo. Blood spilled from Harribel's lips. Looking down, she saw a sword sticking in her guts. And it wasn't Zangetsu. No, she looked up but found the truth staring her in the eyes. Ichigo's image cracked like a cheap mirror. "You," she groaned as Aizen pulled Kyoka Suigetsu out of her guts, dropping to the ground. Flicking the blood off his blade, Aizen looked down at his number 3. In his arm was Asahi, put to sleep with a special Kido to keep the newborn quiet. "Your trust in Ichigo is quite touching. I can see you taught him quite well," he praised with his usual smile. "Give me back Asahi," Harribel groaned, putting a hand to her bleeding stomach. "All in good time. Consider that punishment for failing to bring back Ichigo like I ordered." Aizen sheathed his sword while continuing to look down at the bleeding blonde. "Don't worry, I'm not angry, Harribel. Like I told you before, I'm impressed. What both you and Ichigo have achieved has been remarkable. And the rewards," he looked at the sleeping baby in his arm, "were better than I'd hoped." "What are you doing with Asahi?" "We'll discuss that when we return to Hawako Mundo. You, me, Asahi, and Ichigo." His head tilted to the side as he spotted a figure speeding towards them. "Speak of the devil." "Harribel," Ichigo screamed. He felt his girlfriend's spiritual pressure weaken and raced towards her, only to find her bleeding at Aizen's feet. His horror grew when he spotted their daughter in the rogue's arms. "Aizen," he roared, hitting the ground and running towards them. "Give me back my daughter." Aizen simply stared at the boy, sizing him up with a smile. Then he simply raised a finger. "Lower your voice." "Huh, lower your voice. You wouldn't want to wake up the child, now would you?" Ichigo was caught in a bind. He knew he was stronger than the last time he fought Aizen and could do a lot more than just scratch him. Yet with Asahi in his clutches Ichigo couldn't make a move without risking his daughter's life. "What do you want?" "The same thing I wanted the last time, to talk." "Don't worry." He noted Ichigo's concerned glance to Harribel and took a step away from her. "I have no intention of killing Harribel." "You, oh." Aizen turned to the side. "We have company." Ichigo turned to his right and saw that the captains and lieutenants arrive, minus Rangaku. "Aizen," seethed Toshiro. "What are you doing here?" Byakuya took note of the situation and quickly surmised what was happening. His gaze turned towards Ichigo and he quickly knew that they were approaching the worst-case scenario. "What do you plan on doing with the child?" he demanded. Aizen raised an eyebrow. "Nothing. I've no designs for the child yet. I merely wish to see her grow and see what she will become." He turned back to Ichigo. "As to why I'm here," Aizen's lips formed a knowing smile. I'm simply here to continue the discussion I had with Ichigo. Everyone's head snapped towards Ichigo. Suddenly he found himself on the receiving end of 7 accusing stares. What discussion? Asked Unohana. I met with Ichigo in private to discuss joining me. What? All 8 shouted. Uh-oh. Ichigo gulped. Chapter 34. Karakura Town. All of the blood drained from Ichigo's face. His heart pounded in his chest while he felt the seething stares of the 4 captains and lieutenants as Aizen stood in front of him with his daughter in his arms and a bleeding Harribel at his feet. Byakuya's eyes narrowed. He didn't want to jump to the wrong conclusion, but Ichigo's expression was damning. Ichigo, is this true? He demanded. For a moment Ichigo didn't know what to say. Finally he swallowed the lump in his throat and slowly nodded. Ichigo turned back to Aizen and balled his hands into fists. He showed up right after you guys threatened me. He said he wanted me to join him. But I said no. He quickly added when he saw Byakuya's scathing glare, hoping that the captains wouldn't believe he'd jump over to Aizen's side. Now, Ichigo, chided Aizen like a schoolteacher to a student caught in a fib. If I were to teach you anything, it would be how to lie. Because you aren't very good at it. He gave the boy a knowing smile. If memory serves me correctly, you didn't give me an answer. In fact, judging by the look on your face that day, I'd say you were weighing your options. Ichigo's blood ran cold, yet he still answered back, I still didn't come to you before Harribel gave birth like you asked. True, I was disappointed that you didn't come to me. I was being honest when I said that Hueco Mundo is your only safe haven. But then again, you saw that everything I said was the truth. He cast his eyes downside to Harribel before turning his gaze back to the captains. The captains attempted to murder the both of you when Harribel went into labor, didn't they? The boy remained silent, trying his best to calm his breathing as he looked down at his daughter. If he could just find a way to pry Asahi from him. Aizen, Toshiro interrupted. He had one hand on his sword hilt while he glared at his enemy. Put the baby down, now. Aizen raised an eyebrow. I think not. She is safer in my hands than she is in yours. Unohana stepped forward. What do you intend to do with the child? Her eyes went from the baby to her parents and she started to put the pieces together. And how long have you been planning to take the baby from Ichigo? Forget all of that, Ichigo shouted, getting angry. He took a step forward and gripped his Zanpakuto tightly. Give me back Asahi. Ichigo, you'll find that my intentions for your daughter are far more benevolent than theirs, Aizen replied, gesturing to the captains. And to answer your question, Captain Unohana, I've had plans for Ichigo, Harribel and their baby since the beginning. Ichigo and Harribel both blinked in confusion. Since the beginning, Ichigo repeated. Lord Aizen, what are you talking about? Harribel asked, confused by her master's words. You mean you knew from the beginning that Ichigo and Harribel entered a partnership? Byakuya asked. Aizen shook his head. No, Captain Kuchiki. I've been aware of Ichigo since the day he was born. If Ichigo's blood got colder he'd turn into an ice statue. What the hell do you mean by that? Exactly as I said, I've been aware of you since you were born, so I merely decided to assist in your development. And to see the results of that development has been fascinating. Aizen turned his attention to the ruined desolation where Ichigo fought Baragon. I knew sacrificing Baragon was the right decision to further your holification. Just what the hell do you? Ichigo froze when his eyes turned to Soifon and he remembered what she said when the captains confronted him about Harribel. What kind of fools do you take us for? Like Mayuri said, Rukia Kuchiki just shows up on your doorstep and a hollow just out of the blue attacks you, despite you claiming you've never seen a hollow before. You, Ichigo gasped in horror. You're the one who sent that hollow to attack Rukia. You're the one who sent the Manos Grande when Ryu used his bait. Aizen nodded. Good boy, you catch on quick. That is correct. He reached out and opened his hand. You see, Ichigo, you might think that you aren't on my side, but I've been your shadow this entire time. Everything you've done has been for my benefit. Harribel was not your only secret trainer. I've been there the entire time, helping you grow. He saw the looks of disbeliefs on the captains and lieutenants and decided to elaborate further. Tell me, did Rukia or Captain Yukitaki tell you that I was the one who stationed her in Karakura town? What? Renji gasped, realizing what that meant. Then, all along you meant for Ichigo to take Rukia's powers. I knew that Rukia still felt guilty for the murder of Kai and Shiba. And since Ichigo resembles him, she would subconsciously give him all of her spirit energy as a way to absolve herself of the guilt. Tell me, Ichigo, are you aware of all the facts? Aizen asked the stunned teenager. Did Renji tell you it was me who gave him the equipment to locate Rukia? Or that I was the one who gave him your location during the captain's meeting? The three lieutenants froze, remembering that meeting and how Renji had so suddenly taken off on his own. Soi Fan's eyes stared at Ichigo with murderous intent as the truth was revealed. But I wanted to see you grow further. Left on your own, you would go far, but I felt your development would be too slow. To that end, his eyes returned to the horrified Harribel. I sent Harribel your way. You lie, Harribel screamed. I came to Ichigo of my own volition. I was driven by my own desires, not yours. You had nothing to do with my training him. You did, Aizen acknowledged. But tell me, he stared down at the woman with knowing eyes. Did you think I found you in the desert of Hueco Mundo by happenstance? Harribel fell silent, the blood draining from her face. I sought to give Ichigo a companion who shared his values and could help further facilitate his growth. Don't worry, he reassured her, I did nothing to alter your mind. You simply acted as I knew you would. You desired a companion of your own, and when none could be found in Hueco Mundo, you went to the world of the living and came upon the one person who could make you human again. However, he gestured to the baby in his arms. Did it not strike you as unnatural that you were able to conceive a child when your hollow hole is located in your womb? Harribel remained silent as she processed his words. Then you, her mind turned back to when Aizen transformed her into an Aaroncar. You used the Hogyoku to give me the ability to give birth. The Hogyoku allows Soul Reapers and Hollows to transcend their own limitations. So I allowed you to overcome the limitation of the placement of your hollow hole. And the results of your union was better than I anticipated. Aizen gently rocked the baby in his arms. Now then, we can discuss this more in Hueco Mundo, Ichigo. But first, his smile grew as he looked over at the captains. Why don't you deal with the captains? I am not your slave. Ichigo shouted. I won't listen to you. I'm not ordering you to do anything. I'm simply making a suggestion. Tell me, did Captain Hitsugaya not tell you about Head Captain Yamamoto's order? Ichigo turned to Toshiro and could tell from the sudden look of distress that it wasn't anything good. What order? The looks on Renji and Azane's faces were also telling. Yamamoto has decided, admitted Toshiro, knowing he had to admit the truth, that after the traitor, Sosuke Aizen has been dealt with. You, Harribel, Asahi, Harribel's subordinates and Chad are to be executed. He looked away when he saw Ichigo's shocked look of betrayal, and to kill Asahi to prevent her from manifesting either Soul Reaper or Hollow powers. Toshiro, why? Ichigo asked. After letting Toshiro and Rengoku come into his home, Ichigo felt the sting of betrayal stab deep. You see, Ichigo, Aizen knew he didn't need to push the boy further. The captains were doing that themselves. They fear you so much that they conspire behind their back to murder you. As I said, Asahi is far safer in my hands than in theirs. If you wish to see Asahi again, a black garganta opened up behind him. Come to Hueco Mundo. You will be Barragan's successor as the number 2 Espada. But first, deal with the captains for me. Wait, but it was no use. Aizen walked through the garganta while taking little baby Asahi with them. Ichigo and Harribel were helpless as their daughter was taken away. But as the portal shut behind Aizen, Ichigo realized that he had more pressing matters to attend to at the moment. The captains and lieutenants stared at Ichigo, and for a tense moment all was quiet. Finally, Unohana made a deep sigh and drew her sword. Ichigo Kurosaki, we warned you that if it looked like you were in league with Aizen, then our course of action would be clear. Now there is no doubt of your loyalties, whether intentional or not. You have one of two options. Ichigo's heart froze with fear as the other captains and lieutenants drew their swords. Even Toshiro reluctantly drew his blade. You can fight us and die with your sword in hand and maintain your dignity. Or you can surrender peacefully and be executed at the Soul Society in the most painful of manner reserved for traitors. Your choice. Meanwhile, Hueco Mundo, Las Noches. Oh, Captain Aizen, you're back. Jin greeted as Aizen entered the throne room with a baby in tow. "Oh ho, is that little Asahi?" "Yes, everything worked out better than I expected. Barragan's little insurrection has been dealt with. Ichigo and the Soul Society are now at odds. I expect we should be seeing him in Harribel soon." He handed the baby over to Jin. "Put her in the North Tower." "Ah," the silver-haired rogue fawned as he looked at Harribel's daughter. "She looks just like her mama." However, after a minute Jin's nose rankled. Captain Aizen. What, when you took Asahi, you didn't happen to grab a diaper bag, did you?" "Captain Aizen." Jin turned around and found Aizen gone, leaving him alone with the baby. "Captain Aizen. That's not fair." Chapter 35. Las Noches. Zyalapworo's lab. Zyalapworo walked into his lab, a happy smile on his face. His experiment with Barragan's minions had gone well. He knew it was the right choice to have Barragan volunteer his men instead of sacrificing his own fractions. True, all 6 of the number 2 Espada's men had all perished, but to Zyalapworo that was the price of progress. He approached the Reishi amplifier. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Opening it, a swarm of microscopic insects flew out and dove into a small containment unit at the base of the amplifier, feeding the machine information on Ichigo's spirit energy and pressure. Before he confronted Kazuki and Yoruichi, the scientist had quietly released the insects to monitor Ichigo as he battled Barragan to gain more samples of his spirit energy as well as analyze Barragan's men as they battled. There, now to make adjustments. Punching new calculations into his computers, Zyalapworo watched as the volatile black and energy inside the amplifier began to slowly stabilize. "Perfect. As I suspected, there's no way that an Arrancar that is not on the level of the Espadas could sustain such energy. But now that I've stabilized the substitute spirit energy," Zyalapworo smirked. "The Espadas should have no problem integrating it fully. With this, they can enhance their resurrection." Satisfied, he turned away from the machine. He was more interested in what lay on his dissection table. Lying unconscious on the white stone table was Yoruichi Shihoin. The dark-skinned woman had been taken out of the stone cube and laid on the table, put to sleep by the stasis. In addition, Zyalapworo had her stripped naked, not wanting to let pesky clothing get in the way with experimentation. "This day turned out even better than I hoped." He gestured for one of his servants to bring him a tray of dissection tools. "True, I was unable to acquire Kazuki Urahara, but I can merely obtain him during the final invasion. To think I have a captain-level Soul Reaper at my disposal. Oh, the possibilities." He grabbed a wicked-looking instrument and stood over the unconscious Yoruichi with a malicious smile. "It's time to see what makes you tick." And with that, Zyalapworo went to work. The Frashans looked on quietly, the lab's quiet quickly replaced by the sound of screaming. Meanwhile, Karakura town. Ichigo rushed to put himself between the captains and the fallen Harribel, still lying on the ground with a hand over her wounded stomach from where Aizen stabbed her. "Captain Unohana, No," the woman adamantly said, her eyes brokering no argument. "The time for talk is over, Ichigo. The truth has become clear to all of us. We cannot allow you to join Aizen." "I'm not on Aizen's side," Ichigo insisted. "Can't you see that he's just playing you? Can't you see that you've been played the whole time?" Soi Fan shot back. "I knew that you were in league with him and now here's the proof." Enough, Ichigo," said Unohana. "You can say what you want, but the fact is made clear. At best you are Aizen's puppet. He has steered you your entire life in order to make you his servant. At worst you're a weapon forged by both Aizen and Harribel meant to strike at the heart of the Soul Society. Look at all you've done so far. In such a tiny amount of time you've managed to defeat 3rd Seat Madarame, Lieutenant Abarai, Captain Zaraki and Captain Kuchiki. Then you obtained the power of a hollow from your mentor and have now defeated one of Aizen's top men. If we allow you to become even more powerful, you could become something worse than even Aizen. And now that he is in possession of your baby, you have no choice but to do as he commands." "I'm sorry, Ichigo," Unohana drew Minazuki, "but even if you haven't made your choice, Aizen has made it for you." Soi Fan, Omaeda and Azane all drew their swords. Renji looked at his captain, but Byakuya oddly remained as still as a statue, his expression unreadable while he merely kept a hand on his sheathed hilt. Toshiro, meanwhile, was hesitant to draw his sword. It was clear that he was conflicted about everything now that the truth had been revealed. Harribel struggled to her feet, the bleeding stopped thanks to her regeneration. Don't bother, Ichigo. They were never going to let us live. For all their talk of honor, they planned to murder us as soon as Aizen was dealt with. That's why they didn't even bother to help you fight Baragon. She pointed a blood-stained finger over at the desolation that her former comrade caused. You willingly let Baragon murder a portion of this town. And you would have let him do more in the hopes that he and Ichigo would kill each other. She looked at the Soul Reapers with nothing but disgust. And you call me a monster? Soi Fan narrowed her eyes. I thought I warned you that next time you insulted us. The assassin disappeared from sight. Ichigo whirled around in horror to see Soi Fan behind Harribel, her Shikai already released and aimed at his mentor. It'll be the last. Aiming her stinger at Harribel's back, Soi Fan stabbed at her. Her attack came to a screeching halt though when a golden wall suddenly appeared behind Harribel, protecting her from Soi Fan. What the? All eyes turned around to see Orihime Inoue and Rukia Kuchiki nearby, and opened Senkaimon behind them. Ichigo, Harribel, are you okay? Orihime shouted before her eyes widened in horror when she saw Harribel's wound. You're hurt. Ichigo slashed at Soi Fan's head. The captain somersaulted over Ichigo's blade and landed next to her lieutenant. What is the meaning of this? She demanded, her eyes staring daggers at Rukia. Rukia bristled from the look her older brother was giving her. Rukia, what are you doing here? You were given no order to come here. Taking a deep breath, Rukia plucked up her courage to answer. Captain Yukitake told us the truth. He told us that head Captain Yamamoto planned to dispose of Ichigo and Harribel once the threat of Aizen has been dealt with. We came as soon as we heard that Aizen had infiltrated the world of the living. Where's Asahi? Is she okay? Orihime asked, running over to Harribel. Soten Kishun, I reject. She put her barrier around Harribel and began to heal her injury. Asahi, a tear threatened to spill from Harribel's eye. Aizen, he took our baby. Orihime's face turned white and she gasped. Oh no. That's not all, Harribel admitted. Aizen, he was behind everything. What are you talking about? Renji spoke up, walking past the stoic Byakuya. We just heard it from the horse's mouth. Aizen has been behind everything that's happened to Ichigo. He even manipulated Harribel into training him. Renji clenched his teeth while looking at Ichigo with conflicted eyes. Aizen's been using him from the start. Rukia, he planned all along for you to give your powers to Ichigo. He planned for me and Captain Kuchiki to find you. He even planned on Ichigo beating that Espada. That can't be true. Denied Rukia, running up to Ichigo. There's no way that Aizen could have planned for all of this. It's true, Byakuya said, finally breaking his silence. All of the facts line up. Ichigo has been in Aizen's palm his entire life. Whether he admits it or not. His face turned stern as he stepped forward. Rukia, stand aside. Ichigo is a clear and present danger to the Soul Society. With Asahi Kurosaki in Aizen's possession, Ichigo has no choice but to do what he says. Which means we must take action before Aizen gives Ichigo even more power. Ichigo, Orihime and Harribel looked at Rukia, wondering if she would step aside or join the fray on behalf of her brother. Rukia, Orihime murmured, thinking about all the time they've spent together. Ichigo is innocent. Asahi is innocent. They don't deserve this. Deserves got nothing to do with it, fired back Soi Fan. You were not targeted for disposal, girl. If you want it to keep it that way, you'll step aside and let us end this. Ichigo gripped Zangetsu tightly as he put himself between Soi Fan and Orihime. You won't be hurting anyone today. Toshiro stepped forward. Orihime, Rukia, this doesn't involve the two of you. Please, he looked at the girls with begging eyes. Step aside, for your own sakes. Rukia looked at the ground, conflicted about everything that was happening. Orihime, on the other hand, was far more resolute. I won't let you hurt Ichigo or Harribel. What can you do? You're just a scrawny little girl, mocked Soi Fan. She took a step threateningly towards the two orange heads and held up Suzumbaki's stinger. If you want to die alongside your friends, so be it. I'll bury you all in the same grave. Then a blue arrow suddenly embedded itself in her hand. What? Soi Fan staggered backwards as blood spilled from her wounded palm. First you decide to kill Ichigo when it suits you. Then you sit back and watch an Arrancar murder innocent people indiscriminately without care. Now you're threatening a girl just for standing up to you. Uryu Ishida walked up from behind Harribel and Ichigo, dressed in his Quincy outfit. And just when I thought I couldn't hate you people more. Uryu, Ichigo, Orihime and Rukia gasped. But, I thought, Ichigo started. My father helped me regain my powers. Sorry I'm late. Uryu gave his friend a sympathetic smile. I heard everything. Aizen has the baby. What are you still doing here? What? Uryu's bespectacled eyes glanced over at Harribel. You can open a garganta, right? Then go after her. Why do you care? Harribel questioned. While Uryu did have a point, Harribel was dubious about the Quincy's intentions. I am a hollow and Ichigo is a soul reaper. Why would a Quincy help us? The young man looked away but Orihime could see a small smile on his face. Ichigo is only a substitute. You're an Arrancar, and Asahi is human. I promised my father I would never ally myself with the Soul Reapers. The three of you don't qualify. Ah, loophole. Got it. Hana, however, was not just going to stand there and allow this. And what makes you think we are going to let you escape? She raised a hand to unleash her Kido spell at the group. But as she started a chant, a shadow loomed over her. Enough. The captain jumped back as Isshin Kurosaki came down on her. The ground shook as he landed with a heavy thud. His eyes glared intently at his former comrades, all but Toshiro shocked to see him in the flesh despite being told about Ichigo's parentage. Hello, Captain Shiba. A shame we meet again after all these years in such circumstances. Long time no see, Captain Hana. Sorry if I'm a little grumpy but having my granddaughter being abducted by that bastard and learning you plan on killing my son and his girlfriend has put me in a bit of a mood. Captain Shiba. Toshiro froze on the spot when he received the glare Isshin gave him. He felt even guiltier. Isshin had trusted him. He'd let Toshiro and Rangaku stay in his own home and yet all Toshiro had to repay him was treachery. What are you doing here? Where's Rangaku? Rangaku was badly hurt so I treated her injuries and left her behind a barrier. What the hell does it look like? Protecting my family. Isshin roared back. He turned his head to address the group behind him. What are you waiting for? Aizen has Asahi. Don't just stand there. Get her back. Dad, Ichigo, I heard everything. Aizen has been behind everything. So what? Isshin turned to face his son and stared intently at him. So what if he's been the one pulling the strings? All you need to do is cut them and be free of him. All his ranting means is that you've beaten everything he's thrown at you. You and Harribel can defeat him together. I know it. He drew Engetsu and took a stance before the captains. Now go. Byakuya calmly kept a hand on his Zanpakuto hilt as he stared at Isshin. Captain Shiba, while I'll acknowledge you are a formidable opponent, do you really believe you can defeat all of us by yourself? Not by himself. Chad and the Trace Bestia arrived and stood shoulder to shoulder with Isshin. Ichigo, go and save your little girl. Chad, the young man transformed his arms. We will hold them here. Go and rescue Asahi. Harribel felt torn. On the one hand she needed to go save her daughter. But she couldn't just let her fractions remain behind to potential death by the Soul Reapers. Apache. Mila rose. Sung Sun. Please, Master Harribel, go and rescue your child, Mila Rose answered. We will be waiting for your safe return. As if we're gonna die at the hands of these stupid Soul Reapers. Apache grinned. I'd wager you'll be the first to die. Shut up, Sung Sun. Harribel bit her lip behind her mask. Was this right? To sacrifice her most trusted subordinates for the chance to save her daughter. Sacrifice. She closed her eyes and could feel a sensation start to bubble within her, one she'd felt before during her ruminations. This time, however, it was stronger, like it was waiting just beneath the surface before bursting forth. Nothing in this world is gained without sacrifice. Ichigo and Orihime both noticed the shift in Harribel's spiritual pressure. Harribel, Ichigo murmured, wondering what was happening to his mentor. The woman finally opened her eyes and he saw determination in her emerald gaze. Let's go. Apache. Mila rose. Sung Sun. Don't die on me. Chad, Isshin, thank you. Mind if I tag along? Once more everyone was startled when a new face joined the party. Kazuki landed next to the party. his face more grave than usual. The enemy nabbed Yoruichi. Everyone gasped, most of all Soy Fan. You let the enemy kidnap Lady Yoruichi. She roared, her anger boiling over. Talk later. Rescue now. Agreed. Harribel nodded. She waved a hand and opened a garganta. Let's go everyone. The group all headed into the void after her, all save for one. Rukia. Renji shouted when he saw his friend about to leave. Where are you going? I'm going to help Ichigo. Rukia announced defiantly. If you go, then. You'll what? Execute me again. Rukia shouted back, making Renji flinch. She turned her brother and put on a brave face. She knew she was committing open insubordination and rebellion, but she knew in her heart who needed her help the most. Brother, I'm sorry, but Ichigo needs me. I owe it to him. Brother and sister said nothing. If Byakuya disapproved of his actions, then he didn't show it on his face. He simply closed his eyes and bowed his head slightly. Rukia knew that was as close to acknowledgement as she'd get from her stoic brother. Thank you, she whispered before disappearing into the portal behind, the black void slamming shut. Looks like it's just you and us, Isshin said. Renji looked over to his captain. Renji had his sword out, but Byakuya had yet to draw his blade. Captain. Byakuya remained silent as he observed the situation. Soy Fan was red with fury. It was a miracle that she didn't spontaneously combust. You realize that all you did was ensure you die in your son's place. She took up another stance and readied for a fight. After everything you and your son have done, if any harm comes to Lady Yoruichi, I'll make sure those two other brats of yours die by inches. Isshin's eyes flared with an anger that only a father could have. Lay one hand on my daughters and you won't have hands anymore. I always thought you were an icy bitch. Now I can see you're a vindictive one too. My son had nothing to do with Yoruichi being abducted. His eyes darted to Toshiro. And what about you, Captain Hitsugaya? Are you really just going to stand there and do nothing? Toshiro stared at the ground, feeling like he was being split into two. Yet the part of him that was a soul reaper won out in the end and knew he was going to have to take a side. Captain, no, Isshin Kurosaki. Taking a deep breath, Toshiro drew his sword. You are under arrest for abandoning your post and dereliction of duty. Surrender now or face the consequences. Toshiro, I am your consequence. Isshin pulled his sword back while Chad released his arms and the Trace Bestia readied their weapons for a fight. The two Squad 10 captains both released their shikai at once. Burn. Engetsu. Reign over the frosted heavens. Hirinmaru. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.